He pointed at her like she was a piece of trash. Someone had accidentally tracked in on the bottom of an expensive shoe. Who invited this? Gerald Harmon's voice carried across the entire ballroom, past the crystal chandeliers, past the white-gloved waitstaff, past 200 of the most powerful people in the city, and landed directly on Amara Kessari like a slap. He didn't whisper it. He didn't mutter it under his breath, the way cowards usually do. He announced it. Loud enough for the string quartet to pause. Loud enough for heads to turn. Loud enough for a woman who had done absolutely nothing wrong to feel, in that single moment, as though the floor might open up and swallow her whole. Amara stood very still. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't crumple. But inside, she was scrambling, searching for something solid to hold on to. She found it, and she stayed standing. If you've ever walked into a room and felt every eye on you for the wrong reasons, if you've ever had someone make you feel small in front of people who didn't even bother to look away, then you already know exactly what this story is about. The question isn't whether you've been there. The question is, what would you have done next? Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, if they make your blood boil and your heart ache in equal measure, please take a second and subscribe to this channel. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels, because the woman you're about to meet, she traveled a long way too, and nobody made it easy for her. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Amara Kessari was 34 years old and had never once in her life been late to anything. Not a meeting, not a deadline, not a bus. Her mother had raised her with a precision that bordered on obsessive. If you're not early, you're already apologizing. And even after everything, even after her mother was gone and the apartment was too quiet and the bills kept arriving anyway, that habit held. It was one of the few things that did. She arrived at the Harmon Grand Hotel at 7:43 in the evening, 17 minutes before the gala was scheduled to begin. The invitation had come through her supervisor at Meridian Consulting, where Amara had worked for 6 years as a mid-level financial analyst. Her supervisor, a thin, nervous man named David Park, had handed her the envelope 2 weeks ago with the energy of someone delivering both a gift and an apology. The Harmon families specifically requested a representative from our firm. David had said, not quite meeting her eyes. I thought you'd be the right fit. Your analysis on the Meridian-Voss merger was really strong, Amara. She had said thank you, taken the envelope, and spent the following 2 weeks preparing. She bought a dress not cheap, not extravagant, deep burgundy, with a clean neckline and fabric that moved well when she walked. She researched the Harmon family's portfolio. She prepared talking points. She told herself this was an opportunity, which it was supposed to be, which was the thing about opportunities. They look the same from the outside, whether they're real or whether someone built them as a trap. The hotel lobby smelled like money and flowers. The kind of flowers you don't actually like, but recognize as expensive. Amara handed her invitation to the woman at the registration table, a blonde in her 20s, who took it with 2 fingers and looked at it for slightly longer than necessary. Meridian Consulting, Amara said, in case it helped. The woman typed something else. You're at table 14. Amara thanked her and moved through the lobby toward the ballroom entrance, heels quiet on the marble, spine straight, the way her mother had taught her. You enter a room like you own the table you're sitting at, even when you don't, especially when you don't. The ballroom was enormous, white and gold, and very loud, with the kind of quiet that expensive rooms produce, not silence, but a careful, curated hush beneath the music and the clinking glass. People clustered in configurations that looked casual but weren't. Alliances disguised as small talk. Negotiations happening over appetizers. Amara scanned the room for table 14. She found table 12, table 13, and then table 14, pushed against the wall at the far edge of the room, adjacent to the service corridor, where the waitstaff moved in and out with their trays. It wasn't labeled table 14 in any official sense. You had to squint at the small card tucked behind the floral arrangement to see the number. There it was. She stood there for a moment, just stood, taking it in. The table seated 8. She was the first to arrive. She pulled out her chair, which required moving it slightly to avoid a cart that a waiter was trying to maneuver past, and sat down. She unfolded her napkin. She picked up the menu. She told herself it didn't mean anything, the table placement. Sometimes things were logistical. Sometimes there was no intent behind them. She almost believed it. That was when Gerald Harmon saw her. She hadn't noticed him yet. She'd been reading the menu salmon or beef, and she'd been trying to decide whether the salmon was the kind that would taste like salmon or the kind that would taste like good intentions when she became aware of a shift in the room. A redirecting of attention. The way people move when someone important is speaking. Who invited this? She looked up. Gerald Harmon was 61 years old, built like a man who had never been told no about anything physical or financial. He stood near the center of the room with a glass of scotch in one hand and the absolute certainty of a man in his own house, which, technically, this was. His eyes were on her, only on her, and there was nothing ambiguous about his expression. It was not curiosity, it was not mistake, it was disgust, performed publicly and with full intention. The room turned. 200 people, and every one of them turned to look at the woman sitting alone at table 14. Amara set down the menu. Her hands were steady. She would think about that later. She would lie in her bed at 3 in the morning and replay this moment, and she would wonder at herself, at the steadiness, because she had not chosen it consciously. It had simply been there, some deep-rooted refusal to give him the reaction he was looking for. "Sir? Sir?" One of the event coordinators was already moving toward Gerald, speaking in a low, urgent voice. "Mr. Harmon, perhaps? I'm asking a question." Gerald didn't lower his voice. He wasn't interested in lowering his voice. "I have 200 guests in this room, and someone's had decided it was appropriate to seat." He gestured at Amara with his glass, a loose wave that took in all of her. "Every inch this at my event." There was a laugh from somewhere. Amara didn't look to find it. She kept her eyes on Gerald Harmon, because she would not give the room the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "I'm a representative from Meridian Consulting," she said. Her voice came out even, not loud, not trembling even. "I received an invitation. I can show it to you." "Meridian sent you?" Gerald said it like the concept was physically implausible, like she had told him Meridian had sent a chair or a potted plant, something that didn't belong in a conversation. They did. Gerald looked at someone beside him. His wife, Amara would learn later, a woman in pale blue silk, who had the look of someone who had watched this happen before and had long since stopped trying to stop it. Then he looked back at Amara. "I think there's been a mistake," he said, "and I think you should leave before someone has to make it official." The room was so quiet that Amara could hear the ice in his glass shift. She did not stand up. Not because she wasn't shaken, she was. Underneath all that steadiness, she was shaking in a way she couldn't let anyone see, but because something in her, some old stubborn thing her mother had put there, and grief had only made harder, simply refused. "You do not stand up. You do not walk out of this room so that he can watch you go and feel like he won. You do not give him that." "I'm not leaving," she said. Gerald Harmon blinked. It was brief, that blink, a microsecond of genuine surprise. He had not expected those words, and then it disappeared behind something colder. "Security," he said. But before the nearest security guard could take a single step, something else happened. From the far side of the room, from a table near the wide windows, overlooking the city, a man set down his glass. It made almost no sound. But somehow, in the particular silence of that room, Amara heard it, and so she would realize later, did almost everyone else. She didn't know who he was yet. She just saw him, dark suit, dark eyes, the kind of stillness that didn't come from peace, but from control. He was watching Gerald Harmon, with an expression Amara couldn't quite read from across the room. But whatever it was, 3 of the men closest to him saw it too, and she watched all 3 of them subtly shift, put down their glasses, straighten. The security guard paused. Gerald Harmon hadn't seen it yet. He was still looking at Amara. "I said security. I heard you." The guard said, and then quietly, carefully did not move. Gerald turned, and now he saw the man at the window table. And something moved through Gerald Harmon's face that Amara had not expected to see there. It wasn't quite fear, but it was adjacent to it. It was the look of a man who has just realized he may have made a calculation error, who is busy running the numbers again. The man at the window table did not stand. He did not speak. He simply picked up his glass again slowly and resumed, looking out at the city, as though he had merely glanced over to see what the noise was about and found it insufficient to require his direct attention. Gerald turned back to Amara. The calculation was happening behind his eyes. Table 14 is clearly a clerical error, he said, shifting tone into something that tried to approximate graciousness and didn't quite get there. We'll sort it out. Celia, he gestured to the event coordinator, find her somewhere appropriate. It was in Gerald's mind a resolution, a gracious one even. He had not backed down. He had simply redirected. He turned away. Amara watched him go. Then she looked back at the window table. The man in the dark suit was not looking at the city anymore. He was looking at her. For a moment, just a moment, their eyes met across the room. Then he looked away. Celia, the event coordinator, appeared at Amara's elbow. Miss Kessari, we found you a seat at table 14 is fine, Amara said. Celia blinked. I'm sorry I have an assigned seat. I'll stay in my assigned seat. Amara picked up the menu again. Thank you. Celia stood there for a moment longer. Then she retreated. Amara stared at the menu without reading it. Her heart was going very fast. She was aware. In the precise and clinical way, you become aware of things when you are managing yourself carefully, that her hands had finally started to tremble slightly, there in her lap where nobody could see them. Okay, she thought. Okay. You're okay. You're still here. You stayed. She had stayed. The dinner began. People around her talked and laughed and clinked their glasses, and Amara ate her salmon. It tasted like good intentions, and spoke when spoken to, and smiled when smiling seemed called for, and did not let herself think too hard about the things Gerald Harmon had said, because if she started thinking hard about them, she would have to feel them, and feeling them here, in this room, in front of all these people, was not something she was willing to do. Across the room, the man from the window table ate dinner with two other men, who both looked like they had been hired specifically to make other people nervous. She caught herself looking at him twice. Both times he wasn't looking at her. Both times she felt watched anyway. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know what he did or why he mattered. She didn't know why 3 trained security guards had gone very quiet when he set down a glass. She would know all of it soon enough. The second hour of the evening was when everything got worse. Gerald Harmon's daughter, Petra 26, the kind of beautiful that has been carefully maintained, rather than naturally arrived at, had been watching Amara since the beginning. Amara had noticed her in the way you notice people who are watching you, peripherally, with growing unease. Petra moved through the room with the ease of ownership, touching people on the arm, accepting compliments, laughing at the right moments, and all the while her eyes kept drifting back to table 14 with an expression Amara could not immediately categorize. It wasn't just contempt. It was something more purposeful than that. Around 8:30, Amara excused herself to use the restroom. She was gone 4 minutes. She knew this later. When she went back over it, and when she returned, she set her small evening bag back on her chair and finished the last of her wine and thought about whether to stay until 9 or whether 9:15 was more appropriate. And she was still thinking about this when a woman at the adjacent table made a small noise and leaned forward and said, Is that a diamond bracelet in your bag?" Amara looked down. Her bag was open, and there, half visible at the top, was a bracelet. Diamonds and white gold, catching the light with the particular shamelessness of things that cost more than some people's cars. "That's not mine," Amara said. She said it immediately, automatically, because it wasn't. She had never seen it before in her life. "That's not mine," she said again, because the woman at the adjacent table was looking at her with an expression that had already moved past uncertainty into something firmer and uglier. I don't know how that got there. And then Gerald Harmon, who had apparently been watching too, was there. And Petra was beside him. And the sound of Gerald's voice, already carrying, already loud, already designed to fill a room, hit Amara like something physical. "That bracelet belongs to my wife." The room, which had been buzzing and occupied, went quiet again. That particular quiet. The one that meant everyone was listening. It was in her bag. Petra's voice was clear and cool and absolutely certain. She had practiced this, Amara realized. She had rehearsed exactly this tone. We saw her take it off the display table earlier. "I didn't," Amara started. "Security." Gerald's voice was as a door closing. "Call the police." "She's a thief." Everything that followed happened very fast, and also somehow, very slowly the way emergency situations work, The way time does something strange when your body floods with adrenaline and your mind is trying to process what is happening and also figure out what to do about it simultaneously. The security guards came. Not the ones who had hesitated before different ones, or the same ones now operating under different permission. They came, and they stood around her and someone said, "Ma'am, don't touch the bag," and someone else had a phone out and was filming, and the whole room had reoriented itself toward her, toward table 14, toward Amara Kessari, standing with a bracelet in her bag that she had never seen before, and 50 accusatory faces, and no way to prove a single word of what she was saying. "I didn't take anything," she said. She said it to Gerald, because he was the one who mattered here, because he was the one who had set this in motion, and some part of her still believed irrationally, stubbornly, that truth was something you could present to someone and have them accept it. "I went to the restroom. I came back. I don't know how it got in my bag, but I didn't put it there." "Of course you didn't," Petra said, and smiled, and it was the smile of someone who has won and knows it and cannot keep themselves from showing it. "She's lying." Gerald addressed the room, not Amara. Addressed his guests, his audience, the 200 people he had assembled to impress, and now had the opportunity to entertain at someone else's expense. This is exactly why certain people shouldn't be in certain rooms. There was a murmur. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. Amara stood in the middle of it, surrounded, filmed, publicly named as a thief, with a bracelet in her bag and no proof and no allies and no way out that didn't look like guilt. And she thought of her mother, suddenly and without warning, the way grief works, ambushing you at the exact moments when you most need to be somewhere else. She thought of her mother saying, "You walk in like you own the table." She thought, "I don't own anything in this room. I don't belong in this room." They were right. They were all right. I should have known. And then she stopped. No. She stopped that thought with both hands and held it still and looked at it and said, "Ziz, that is not true. That has never been true. And you are not going to let him make it true right now." She straightened her spine. She looked at Gerald Harmon. "I'd like to see the security footage," she said. Gerald laughed. It was a contemptuous sound, dismissive. "The police will handle this." "I'd like to see the security footage," she said again. Steady. Specific. "From the last 20 minutes. Show me the footage and I'll accept whatever it shows." Gerald's laugh faded. Something crossed his face. A hesitation so brief it was almost invisible. "The footage is not available for why not?" "Because I said so. Because this is my..." "Show her the footage." The voice came from across the room. Low. Precise. The kind of voice that doesn't raise itself because it has never needed to. And every single person in that ballroom, Amara included, turned to look at the man in the dark suit, who had finally quietly risen from his table. Lucian Vey walked toward them. He didn't walk fast. He didn't walk with any visible urgency. He moved through the crowd, the way water moves downhill, inevitable, unhurried, finding the path of least resistance and taking it, and people stepped aside for him before they'd consciously decided to, because something in the brain recognizes certain kinds of stillness and signals the body to make room. He stopped a few feet from Amara. He looked at the bag. He looked at the bracelet. He looked at Gerald Harmon. Then he looked at the security guard nearest to him, a large man in a black suit who was a full 3 inches taller than Lucian and had, up until 30 seconds ago, been very confident about his position and said quietly, "Who gave you permission to touch her?" The security guard's name was Curtis. He had worked private event security for 11 years. He had removed drunk CEOs from hotel lobbies, talked down belligerent ex-husbands at charity dinners, and once physically restrained a man who had thrown a chair at a senator. He was not, by any reasonable measure, someone who frightened easily. He took one look at Lucian Vey and stepped back. Not dramatically, not with any visible acknowledgement that he was doing it. He just recalibrated his position, shifted his weight, created, without meaning to, a small amount of additional space between himself and the man who had just asked him a question in a voice that sounded perfectly reasonable, and somehow made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. We were just... Curtis started. "That's not an answer," Lucian said. Still hadn't raised his voice. He was still standing with that particular economy of movement that suggested he had never wasted energy on anything in his life. His eyes moved from Curtis to the second security guard, a younger man whose name tag said Ben, who had gone the color of old chalk. Then back to Gerald Harmon. Gerald was doing something with his face that he probably thought looked like composure. It didn't. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Gerald said. He reached for his scotch, realized his glass was somewhere behind him, and abandoned the motion partway through, which left his hand hanging in the air briefly before he lowered it. "This is a private matter, a security issue. I'd appreciate it if you..." Gerald. The woman in pale blue silk, Eleanor Harmon, Gerald's wife, put a hand on her husband's arm. Her voice was very quiet. Her face, which had been carefully neutral all evening, had tightened around the eyes. She had recognized Lucian Vey before her husband had. You could see it in the specific quality of her stillness, the kind of stillness that comes from deciding very quickly that you need to be absolutely invisible. Gerald looked at his wife. Something passed between them. A communication with no words, the kind married people develop over decades. And then Gerald looked back at Lucian, and the color in his face shifted by a shade. "Mr. Vey," Gerald said. The name came out careful. "Handled. The footage," Lucian said. He didn't acknowledge the name, the recognition, any of it. He was looking at Gerald Harmon the way a man looks at something he is deciding whether or not to pick up. She asked to see the footage. "You heard her. The hotel's security system is..." "I know the hotel's security system," Lucian said. "I know the man who installed it. I know what it covers and how long it retains. And I know that the cameras in this room have been running since 6 o'clock this evening. So when you tell me the footage is unavailable, Gerald, I need you to help me understand what you mean by that." Exactly. The room had gone so quiet that Amara could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. She was aware, in a distant and somewhat dissociated way, that 200 people were watching this, and that her bag was still in the security guard's hand, and that there was a bracelet in it that wasn't hers, and that none of that had changed. But something else had changed. The gravitational center of the room had shifted, and it had shifted toward the man standing 3 feet to her left. Gerald's jaw worked. "I'm not accustomed to being spoken to." "That's fine," Lucian said. "Get accustomed. Or get me the footage in the next 5 minutes. Those are the options." Petra Harmon, who had been standing just behind her father with that particular smile still arranged on her face, took a small step forward. She was the kind of woman who had learned early that her face was an asset, and she deployed it now, turning toward Lucian with her chin up and her expression reconfigured into something that was trying very hard to be both confident and charming. "Mr. Vey," she said, "we appreciate your concern, but this woman was Scene's. Were you watching her the whole time?" Lucian turned to Petra. Just turned slowly. "The whole evening?" Petra blinked. Yes, actually. I was keeping an eye on..."
"Why?"
The word landed like something dropped on a hard floor. Petra's smile didn't disappear exactly. It just went hollow behind the eyes. "Because she made my mother uncomfortable earlier. And I was..." "You were watching her," Lucian said, "but you didn't see her take the bracelet." "I saw her near the display table." "That's not what I asked." He waited. Just waited, with that patience that wasn't patience at all, but something that wore patience as a mask. "Did you see her take it? Yes or no?" Petra's mouth opened, then closed. And in that silence, in that one fractional second of silence that Petra Harmon created by being unable to produce the word yes, something happened to the room. A shift in the air. The kind of thing that 200 people feel simultaneously, and none of them will be able to explain later, but all of them will remember. The feeling of a story changing direction mid-sentence. Amara felt it too. She looked at Petra Harmon's face, at the micro-expression that had cracked the smooth surface of it, for just a moment, and she thought, she knows. She knows she doesn't have this. And she knows she just gave that away. "Get me the footage," Lucian said to Gerald. Not to Petra. To Gerald, who was the one with the authority, and who was, increasingly obviously, also the one with less and less idea what to do with it. Gerald looked at his wife again. Eleanor gave him nothing. She had removed herself from this situation as thoroughly as a person can, without physically leaving a room. Her hand was no longer on his arm. She had stepped back by about 2 inches, barely noticeable, and was looking at a point somewhere past Gerald's left shoulder. "Fine," Gerald said. The word came out compressed, like he was biting down on it. "Marcus." He directed this at a man near the ballroom entrance, someone in a hotel management blazer, who had been watching everything with the rigid posture of a man hoping very hard that his name would not be called. "Pull the ballroom footage. Last 45 minutes. Marcus moved immediately. The gratitude of a man given a clear task he can execute without thinking was visible from across the room. Amara became aware that her knees were not entirely steady. She had been standing very still for the past several minutes, and her body, which had been running on adrenaline and stubbornness, was starting to send her a memo about the costs of that. She breathed in slowly through her nose, breathed out, kept her face even. She looked at Lucian Vey. He was not looking at her. He was looking at Petra Harmon, who had retreated slightly toward her father and was doing something with her hands, smoothing the front of her dress, pressing her palms flat against the fabric that looked like a nervous habit she was trying to suppress. "Where were you sitting?" Lucian said to Petra. It wasn't quite a question. "For the dinner." "Table 2, Petra said. Her voice had changed quality. Some of the brightness had come out of it. "Table 2. Lucian nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "And the display table, with the bracelet that's near the east wall, between the entrance and the bar." "Yes." So to see her near the display table, clearly enough to identify her among 200 guests, you'd have needed to be looking directly at her. Over quite a distance. He paused. For quite a while. Petra said nothing. "That's a lot of attention to pay to someone you've never met." She stood out. Petra said, and there it was, a flash of something real and ugly behind the careful surface. There and gone in half a second. But Amara caught it. She had the feeling that Lucian caught it too, because something in his expression, which was not really an expression so much as a controlled absence of one adjusted, the way a camera adjusts focus. Gerald stepped forward. He had apparently decided that the best available move was to reclaim the room through volume, because his voice went up by several decibels. "This is my event, in my hotel, on my property. A piece of my wife's jewelry was found in this woman's bag, and I don't need—" "Found," Lucian said. Gerald stopped. "You said found. You said it was found in her bag." Lucian tilted his head slightly. "Not that she took it. Not that anyone saw her take it. Found." The silence was different now. It had texture. Gerald's face was doing something complicated. The look of a man who has built a very large structure and is only now noticing that the foundation was poured wrong. The man named Marcus came back across the room. He had a tablet in his hand and the look of someone who very much wished he were somewhere else. He stopped in front of Lucian, not Gerald, Lucian, which was itself a statement about how the room's power dynamics had redistributed themselves in the last 10 minutes, and held out the tablet. "The footage, sir. I've pulled the relevant time window." Lucian took the tablet. He looked at it for a moment. His face gave nothing. Then he turned it so that Gerald could see. Gerald looked at the screen. The color left his face in a way that was almost interesting to watch. It didn't drain slowly. It went all at once, like a switch. "That's—" he started. "That's your daughter," Lucian said, at the display table. "At 8:22, when your wife's bracelet was removed from the display." He let Gerald look at it for another moment. "And that he moved his finger on the screen is your daughter, at 8:26, walking past table 14. When Miss Kessari was not at table 14 because she was in the restroom." He set the tablet down on the nearest surface, a carefully unhurried motion. "Which you knew, because you were watching her." The last sentence was directed at Petra. Petra Harmon did not say anything. She had gone very still, in the way people go still when they are computing their options and coming up empty. The room had made a sound. Not one voice. All of them, simultaneously, a kind of collective exhale that contained a lot of different things: shock and discomfort, and the particular pleasure that people who have just watched someone powerful get cornered will always feel, no matter how hard they try to pretend otherwise. Amara looked at Petra Harmon. She looked at the young woman's face, the careful beauty of it, the practiced social fluency of it, and underneath all of that, something that Amara recognized, not with sympathy but with a cold clarity. Someone who had never once considered that the person she was targeting might have anyone in their corner. Someone who had looked at Amara and seen a type target, a woman with no connections, no resources, no one who would stand up and say, "Wait." The anger that moved through Amara in that moment was not the hot, trembling kind. It was something older and quieter and far more stable, the kind of anger you can stand on. "I want my bag back," Amara said. Curtis, the security guard, who was still holding it, looked from Amara to Lucian to Gerald and then, very carefully, held the bag out to Amara. She took it. She removed the bracelet herself, held it out to Eleanor Harmon without a word, and set her bag over her shoulder. Gerald was breathing through his nose. His eyes had the look of a man running through exits and finding them blocked. Marcus, he said, this is the footage doesn't necessarily show. Gerald. Eleanor's voice. Quiet. Precise. The voice of a woman who has watched her husband dig holes for 30 years and has finally, in this moment, decided she is not picking up a shovel. Stop talking. Gerald looked at his wife. Eleanor was looking at the floor. Just the floor, with an expression that was not quite shame and not quite exhaustion, but somewhere between the two, in the territory of someone who has known for a long time that something like this was coming. Lucian took out his phone. He typed something, one brief message, 12 seconds, looking at the screen with the focused efficiency of a man for whom time is never casual, and put it back in his pocket. The footage will be preserved, he said to no one in particular, and somehow everyone in the room understood that this was not a statement of intention, but a statement of fact. Something that was already done. All of it. From 6 o'clock, Petra made a sound. Not quite a word. Petra, her mother said. One word. Flat. Petra closed her mouth. The guests nearest to table 14 had not gone back to their conversations. The ones further away were pretending to, but the pretense was thin. Amara could feel the room watching her differently now, not with the contempt of an hour ago, but with something more complicated. The gaze of people who had witnessed something they hadn't expected and were still figuring out what it meant for them. Gerald Harmon straightened his jacket. He looked at Amara. He opened his mouth. Don't, Lucian said. Gerald closed his mouth. There's nothing you can say to her right now that helps you, Lucian continued, still in that quiet and utterly reasonable voice. You should understand that. Whatever you're about to say, apology, explanation, justification, it doesn't help you tonight. So don't. It was, Amara thought, a strange thing to watch. A man like Gerald Harmon, who had walked into his own ballroom 2 hours ago with the complete confidence of someone who owned every room he entered, being told what not to say and saying nothing. Not because Lucian had threatened him, not because anyone had raised a voice, but because Gerald Harmon, in the space of 15 minutes, had done the arithmetic and arrived at the correct answer, which was that the man standing in front of him was not a man you made worse. One of the men from Lucian's table had drifted to the edge of the scene. He was large, dressed well, and had a face like a wall. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't needed to. He was just there, in the way that certain absences of space communicate everything. Amara looked at Lucian. He was still looking at Gerald, but she felt the moment he registered her attention because something shifted in his posture, not toward her, not obviously, but in the way that people shift when they become aware of being seen. Are you all right? He said, still not looking at her. Said it to the air between them. Yes, she said. A brief pause. That's not true. She almost laughed. The laugh surprised her rose up from somewhere underneath the anger and the adrenaline, quick and involuntary, and she pressed her lips together. And it didn't quite come out, but it was close. I've had better evenings. I imagine so. Gerald was still standing there. He had the look of a man who wants very badly to leave his own room and cannot figure out how to do it without it looking like retreat. Eleanor had moved to his side and had taken his arm, not in the supportive way, but in the directional way, the way you take the arm of someone you need to steer. We'll be in touch, Lucian said to Gerald, not as a threat, as a logistical statement. Gerald and Eleanor Harmon walked away. The crowd parted for them, not respectfully, more the way a crowd parts for something it is uncomfortable being near. Petra did not move. She stood where she had been standing, and Amara watched the confidence drain from her in real time, replaced by something younger and less constructed. She wasn't a monster, Amara thought. Or maybe she was, but she was also 26 years old and had just been publicly and irrefutably caught, and the face she had underneath the performance was the face of someone who had genuinely not believed this was possible, that there would be consequences, that the world would not simply arrange itself the way she had arranged it in her head. You should call a lawyer, Lucian said to her. Petra looked at him. Her eyes were bright, not quite crying, the specific brightness of someone pressing very hard against tears in public. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said. It came out small. Nothing like her voice from an hour ago. Amara looked at her. She had about 10 different responses, and she pressed all of them down and said nothing, because she was not going to give Petra Harmon a scene. She was not going to stand here and perform forgiveness or rage for an audience of 200 people who had done nothing when she was surrounded and filmed and called a thief. She picked up her bag more firmly on her shoulder and turned to the nearest waiter. "Is there somewhere I could get a glass of water?" The waiter, young, dark-haired, who had been watching everything from 5 feet away, with the expression of someone who will be telling this story for decades, nodded immediately. "Yes, ma'am. Of course." She followed him toward the bar. She was aware of Lucian watching her go. She did not turn around. She got her water and stood at the bar and drank half of it in one pull and pressed the cold glass against her forehead for a moment, with her eyes closed, because there was nobody immediately next to her, and she could afford a moment, just one moment, of not performing. Her phone buzzed. Text from David Park. "I'm seeing something on social media about the gala. Are you okay? Do you need me to call?" She stared at the message. Social media. Of course. The phones that had come out when she was surrounded someone had posted something, or multiple somethings, and now whatever had happened in this room was propagating outward beyond it. She typed back, "I'm okay. We can talk tomorrow." She put her phone away. She finished the water. She set the glass down on the bar and looked at the room that had laughed at her and filmed her and closed around her, and she breathed. A man appeared at her elbow. Not Lucian. The other one from Lucian's table, the large, quiet one with the wall for a face. He set a card on the bar next to her empty glass without saying anything. "What's this?" she said. "Mr. Vey would like to speak with you," he said. "Not tonight. When you're ready." "That's a number that will reach him." She looked at the card. No name on it. Just a number. "Why?" she said. The man seemed to consider the question genuinely. He didn't say exactly. "But he doesn't give that number to many people." She picked it up, held it. The card was heavy stock, cream-colored, the kind of thing produced by someone who considered weight a form of communication. "Tell him I'll think about it," she said. The man nodded once and walked away. Amara put the card in her bag. She looked across the room, found Lucian without trying. He was back at his own table now, seated, talking to the other man across from him, not looking in her direction, and she studied him for a moment. The way you study something you know is complicated and haven't decided yet whether to engage with. She had known in the abstract that powerful men existed, that they moved through the world differently. She had not known, until tonight, what it looked like up close, what it felt like to stand next to it, how it wasn't loud or demonstrative, the way power was usually portrayed, how it was, instead this, the ability to say 2 quiet sentences and have a room full of wealthy, titled, connected people reorganize themselves around those sentences without being asked. She didn't know what Lucian Vey was. She didn't know what he wanted or why he'd intervened or what would happen next. She knew the kind of city she lived in. She knew that men who had that kind of pull didn't get it through legitimate means, not entirely. And she knew that whatever tonight had been was not over. The footage existed. Petra had been exposed in front of 200 witnesses. Gerald Harmon had been publicly humiliated in his own ballroom by a man he was clearly afraid of. Things like this didn't end when the party ended. She was almost at the door. She had made her quiet rounds, collected her coat from the check, decided that staying until 9:15 was no longer a requirement this particular evening. When she felt a hand close around her wrist, she was not hard, not aggressive, but definite. She turned. Petra Harmon, up close, without the confidence and the performance. She was younger than she'd seemed. Her makeup had cracked very slightly in the corners of her eyes. She was gripping Amara's wrist with her fingers, not her whole hand, and her grip was less restraint than desperation. "I need you to understand something," Petra said. Her voice was low and very fast. "What happened tonight? What you think you saw on that footage?" "Let go of my wrist," Amara said. Petra didn't. Not immediately. Her eyes were doing something complicated. Searching Amara's face for something what? Amara wasn't sure. Permission, maybe. Or the specific kind of mercy that only people who have never needed mercy think they can ask for. "If this gets out, if you let him pursue this, my family." "Let go of my wrist," Amara said again. Quiet. Specific. Petra released her. The desperation hadn't left her face. It had just shifted into something more naked, without the grip to anchor it. Your family, Amara said, called me a thief. In front of 200 people, while phones were out. She looked at Petra for a moment, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to earlier, when looking meant feeling and feeling meant losing, something she couldn't afford to lose. You put that bracelet in my bag. You thought about it, and you planned it, and you did it, and you want me to help you with the consequences. She pulled her coat closed and turned toward the exit. You don't know what my father is capable of. Petra's voice came from behind her, and it had shifted again. The desperation had gone somewhere colder, and what was left was the threat that had been underneath it all along. The threat that people like Petra reach for when they have run out of everything else. You think tonight was bad? If you walk out of here with that man's protection, if this goes further than tonight. Amara stopped walking. She did not turn around. She stood very still with her back to Petra Harmon, and she breathed in and out once, carefully. Then she turned. What is your father capable of? She said. Specifically, I'd like to know. Because I've spent the last 2 hours being humiliated in front of his guests, accused of theft in front of cameras, and surrounded by his security, because your family decided I was a useful target. She watched Petra's face. She watched the woman try to reassemble something and fail. I'm not scared of your father, Petra. I'm tired of him. Different. She turned back to the exit. She pushed through the door into the lobby, and then through the lobby to the street, and the night air hit her face, and she stopped on the sidewalk and stood there for a moment with the noise of the city, around her real noise, unperformed, unmanaged, and she let herself shake. Just for a moment. Just there on the sidewalk with the cold air and the distant sound of traffic. She let her hands tremble and her breath go ragged, and all the things she had been holding back since Gerald Harmon had pointed at her like garbage and said, "Who invited this?" She let them move through her. A minute, maybe 2. Then she straightened. She took a breath. She started walking. Behind her, through the glass doors of the Harmon Grand Hotel, in a ballroom full of people who were now pulling out their phones to search a name, Lucian Vey sat at his table with a glass he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. His associate, Reno, was speaking to him in a low voice. The footage has been secured, Reno said. Copies to 3 locations. And there's something else. Tell me. The Harmon family's accounting firm, the one that handles their private portfolio. One of our people did a preliminary pull when you texted. Reno set a phone on the table. There's a reason they needed tonight to go cleanly. There's a reason they needed a clean story and a clear villain. He watched Lucian look at the screen. They're hemorrhaging. The offshore accounts. The shell company, someone, has been asking questions. And the Harmons have been covering. Tonight was supposed to be about optics. Showing their allies everything was fine. He paused. She wasn't just a convenient target. She was selected. Her company, her background, her lack of local connections. Gerald Harmon's people chose Meridian Consulting specifically and pushed for her to be sent because they needed someone with no safety net. Lucian looked at the screen for a long moment. How long have they been running it? He said. 7 years minimum, possibly longer. Lucian set the phone face down on the table. He looked across the room at the door Amara had walked through 2 minutes ago. His expression was entirely unreadable. Find out everything, he said. Reno nodded. He picked up his own phone. And Reno, Lucian said without looking at him. The woman. Amara Kessari. I want to know everything about her too. Who she is. What she built. What they thought they were destroying tonight. He picked up his glass for the first time in 20 minutes. They chose her because they thought she could nothing. I want to know if they were right. Reno didn't answer immediately. He had worked with Lucian Vey for 9 years and had learned, in that time, to notice the specific quality of Lucian's attention when it fixed on something. It was different from curiosity. It was more deliberate than interest. She told me to tell you she'd think about it, Reno said. The number. Lucian said nothing. She didn't look scared, Reno said. When she took the card, she looked like she was deciding something. Good, Lucian said. He set his glass down. He looked at the door one more time. Then he turned back to the window and the city that spread out below it, bright and indifferent and full of things that had been hidden for too long. Outside, 4 blocks away, Amara Kessari walked through the city with the cold card in her bag and her hands steadying themselves and her mind already sorting, already calculating. already building the next move from whatever material the night had left her, because she was her mother's daughter, and she did not stop. She did not fold, and whatever was coming, she would meet it standing. She called David Park at 7:45 the next morning. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he had been waiting for it, which told her he already knew more than he had said in his text the night before. Amara. His voice had that particular quality, careful, pre-apologetic, the voice of a man who has rehearsed a conversation and is hoping you'll follow the script he prepared. I've been trying to reach you since last night. I saw the videos online, and I just want you to know that the firm completely supports. David, she said. Stop, he stopped. She was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee she hadn't drunk and her laptop open to 3 different tabs, a legal dictionary, her employment contract, and a social media thread that had, overnight, accumulated 47,000 engagements on a video someone had taken at the gala. The video showed Gerald Harmon pointing at her. It showed the security guards surrounding her. It did not show Lucian. The angle had cut him out, or someone had chosen the cut, but whatever the reason, the footage that was circulating showed only Amara Kessari, alone, in a burgundy dress, surrounded. The comments were a mix of things she was not going to read closely. I need to know something, she said to David. I need you to tell me the truth, and I need you to do it fast, because I have a lot to figure out today, and I don't have time for the version of this conversation where you protect yourself first. Pause. Okay. Did Gerald Harmon specifically request me for the gala? Pause this time was different. Longer. The quality of it was not uncertainty, but the sound of a decision being made. Amara, did he? There was a preference expressed, David said. He said it quietly, like he was hoping the quiet would soften it. When the invitation came through, the Harmon office communicated that they wanted a representative with international background and experience in emerging market analysis. You fit the profile, and your work on the Voss merger was genuinely. That's not what I asked. She kept her voice level. She was good at that. She'd been getting better at it for the past 12 hours. Did Gerald Harmon's office ask for me by name or by description? Another pause. Description, David said. The description was very specific. Amara closed her eyes, opened them, looked at the laptop screen. What was the description, David? She heard him breathe. Female analyst, immigrant background. No, he stopped. Started again. No significant domestic connections. Their words, not mine. No significant domestic connections. She sat with that for a moment, turned it over, looked at all its surfaces. They had not chosen her because of her work. They had chosen her because of what they'd calculated she lacked. No family nearby, no powerful friends, no network that would fight back if something went wrong. She was, on paper, a woman who could be discarded without consequence. Why didn't you tell me? She said. I genuinely thought it was an opportunity. I thought the specificity of the request meant they were serious about the partnership, that they wanted someone who could. You thought it looked good for the firm, she said. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. I'm going to need some time, she said. I'm not coming in today. Of course. Take whatever you need. The firm is fully. She ended the call. She sat in the kitchen with the untouched coffee and the open laptop and the slowly growing certainty that last night had not been an accident, had not been a spontaneous cruelty, had been something planned and targeted and specific, and that the plan had been built on the assumption that Amara Kessari would have no one to call. She picked up her bag from the counter. She reached inside it. She found the cream-colored card. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it back and made herself another cup of coffee and sat down to read everything she could find about Gerald Harmon, his family, his businesses, and the financial structures that held all of it together. She read for 3 hours. She read carefully, the way she'd been trained to read numbers and patterns, looking for what was missing as much as what was there. What she found in the public record, in the filing gaps, in the inconsistencies between what the Harmon family reported and what their operational footprint suggested, was enough to tell her that whatever Reno had found in Lucian's preliminary pull the night before was probably the surface of something much larger. At 11:14, she called the number on the card. It rang twice. Miss Kessari, Lucian's voice. He'd known it was her. Of course he had. I have questions, she said. I know. I'm not interested in knowing anyone anything, she said. I want to say that first, clearly, before we talk about Whatever you think we should talk about. Brief silence. That's fair. Good. She looked at her notes spread across the kitchen table. 3 pages of handwritten observations in her tight, careful script. The Harmon family. What do you know about their labor practices in the Eastern Shipping District? The silence on the other end was not empty. It was the silence of someone recalibrating. At the More than you, Lucian said. How did you get there? Public filings. The gap between declared payroll and operational costs in their logistics subsidiaries. It's not subtle if you know what to look for. She paused. They're paying people off the books, workers who can't complain, because their status makes them vulnerable. And the gala was Gerald needed last night to go smoothly because someone is already looking at him. Some authority, some investigation that hasn't gone public. He needed his allies to see a clean operation. He needed the room on his side. She stopped. I was selected as a distraction, yes, Lucian said. They targeted me specifically because if I made noise, nobody would listen. Foreign, no connections, easy to discredit. Yes. She pressed her pen flat against the table. How long have you known about this? Pieces of it. For a while. His voice was measured, not defensive. Last night filled in some gaps. And you were at that gala for my own reasons, he said. Not related to the Harmons. Initially. Things changed. She looked at her notes. She looked at the card. She thought about her mother, who had worked herself quiet and permanent into an early death, trusting that the systems were basically fair and that hard work would be seen, and that character was its own protection. She thought about how wrong that had been, how consistently, specifically wrong. I want to meet, she said, today. Somewhere public. There's a place on Carver Street. Delhi. Corner booth. 1 o'clock. I'll be there at 12:45, she said. She heard something that might have been a breath of amusement. I know, he said. She hung up. She was ready to leave at 12:15 and made herself wait until 12:20 because she was not going to spend 25 unnecessary minutes sitting in a daily, waiting for a man she didn't know and shouldn't trust, regardless of what he'd done the night before. She got there at 12:43. He was already there. Corner booth, coffee in front of him, looking at his phone with the specific economy of someone who is not filling time but actually working. He looked up when she sat down. In the daylight, without the ballroom and the drama arranged around him, he was different. Not smaller exactly. More visible. The sharp angles of his face. The way his eyes moved. Always a count ahead. Always logging. Never quite at rest. You look tired, he said. I didn't sleep, she said. You look like you did. 4 hours. It's enough. She ordered coffee from the waiter and waited for it to arrive before she said anything else, because she needed something to do with her hands, and because she had learned, years ago, that the person who speaks first in a negotiation gives something away. Tell me what you know, she said. Everything. Not the version you decide I need. Everything. Lucian looked at her for a moment. Then he told her. It took 20 minutes. He spoke without consulting anything, which meant he'd already organized it, which meant he'd been preparing this since at least last night. The Harmon family's operation was not new. It had been running for the better part of a decade, and it worked, as these things usually work, through layers. Legitimate business on the surface, the consulting firms, and the event venues, and the charitable foundation with Gerald's name on it, and underneath, the labor network. Immigrant workers, primarily from 4 different countries, brought in through a contracting firm that existed specifically to create distance between the workers and the Harmons. Paid below standard, denied benefits, kept compliant through the specific leverage of documentation status. 7 years of it, possibly more. The city's labor authority had opened a preliminary inquiry 8 months ago. It had not gone far because the Harmon family had 2 people on the relevant oversight board, and because the initial tip had come from a single worker who had subsequently, and Gerald would say voluntarily, returned to his country of origin. The gala had been a show of strength, a demonstration that the family was stable, connected, untouchable, that whatever questions were circulating in certain offices could be managed because the people asking them would look around and see 200 powerful allies who had just eaten Gerald Harmon's food and drunk his wine and shaken his hand. Amara had been the insurance policy. A visible incident, a theft accusation, A clean resolution in Gerald's favor would have put the room firmly on the family's side. It would have created a shared story. The Harmons had been gracious and decisive. They had handled a difficult situation. They were exactly who they said they were. It had not gone that way. The worker who filed the complaint, Amara said. The one who left. His name is Jonas Ibarra. He's currently in Lagos. Is he safe? Lucian looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not much, but enough. Yes, he's been safe since January. Since January, she said. You've been watching this since January. I've been watching the Harmons for longer than that, Lucian said. For other reasons. Jonas's situation added a dimension. What other reasons? He picked up his coffee. Set it down. The Harmons have been moving money through a subsidiary that intersects with certain interests of mine, not cooperatively. They moved it without my awareness or consent. He said it without any particular heat, which somehow made it worse. I don't appreciate that. She processed this. So this is also about territory, among other things. And last night I saw something that had nothing to do with my reasons for being there, he said, and I dealt with it. She looked at him. Why? He met her eyes. Because I was watching, and nobody else was doing anything. That's the only reason? He didn't look away. What other reason would you like? She let that sit for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee and held it in both hands, because the deli's was cool, and her hands were still doing that thing they'd been doing. Since last night, the low-level tremor she kept suppressing. What happens next? She said. That depends on what you want. I want my name clear, she said immediately. Completely. Publicly. Not a quiet retraction in a press release nobody reads. I want it said, directly and specifically, that I didn't take anything, and that I was targeted deliberately. That's already happening, he said. The footage has been shared with the Labor Authority, and the 2 journalists I trust had to use it correctly. By tonight, Gerald Harmon's version of last night will not be available to him anymore. She had expected to feel relieved by that. She felt instead like she was standing at the edge of something. And the workers, she said. The case is building. It needs a formal statement from someone who was there last night. Someone credible, with professional standing, who can speak to what they witnessed. He paused. And ideally, someone who is willing to put their name on a supplementary financial analysis of the Harmon Group subsidiary structures. The kind of analysis that makes the Labor Authority's inquiry very difficult to quietly close. She put her coffee down. You want me to be the witness, she said. I want to ask if you're willing, he said. It's different. It's different, she repeated. She thought about David Park and the description. Female analyst. Immigrant background. No significant domestic connections. She thought about how they had chosen her to be nothing, to be used and discarded. She thought about Petra Harmon's face when she'd said, I need you to understand something, and the threat underneath it, and the fact that the threat had assumed Amara would calculate the cost and decide it was too high. What does it cost me, she said, realistically. What do I lose if I do this? Lucian didn't insult her by saying nothing. Your position at Meridian is probably gone, he said. The firm won't want the association. They'll frame it as a mutual decision. But you'll be out within a month. The Harmon family's allies, and they have a significant number, will make professional moves against you. References will go cold. Some doors will close. He looked at her steadily. You're good at what you do. You know that. But the industry in this city is smaller than it looks. And Gerald Harmon has been in it for 30 years. And the upside? Gerald Harmon goes down, Lucian said. His workers get what they're owed. The inquiry becomes a prosecution. And you, he stopped. For just a moment, you are the analyst who broke the Harmon Group. Not the woman who was accused at a gala. The one who built the financial case that nobody else had built. She looked at the table. She looked at the notes she'd brought in her bag. The 3 pages of her own analysis that she had done in a single morning, because the pattern had been there in the public record all along, and it had just been waiting for someone to read it correctly. She was 34 years old. She had a salary that covered her rent and her mother's outstanding medical debt, and not very much else. She had a job she was good at that had sent her into a room like a sacrificial offering. She had no significant domestic connections. And she was the only person in this situation who had done the actual math. I need a lawyer, she said. I know one, Lucian said. Your lawyer, she said. Not your lawyer. Mine. Someone who is working for me. He reached into his jacket and produced a card. Different from the cream card, this one had a name on it. She works independently, he said. I've referred people to her before. She does not work for me. You can verify that. Amara took the card. Read the name, Maya Osei. She'll take your call today. Amara put the card next to her coffee cup and looked at it. Then she looked at Lucian Vey. She was trying to read him, the way she read documents for what was missing, for the gap between stated purpose and underlying structure. And it was hard because he was genuinely difficult to read, which was probably intentional. And because the events of the last 18 hours had done something to her judgment that she didn't fully trust yet. I'm going to be honest with you, she said. Please. I don't know what you are, she said. I don't know exactly what you do or how you do it, or what the full accounting of it looks like. I have guesses. I think my guesses are probably accurate. She kept her eyes on him. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter to me, because it does. I have a line I've kept my whole life, between what I'm willing to be part of and what I'm not. And it's not a sophisticated line. It's actually pretty simple, but it's mine, and I've kept it even when it cost me. He was listening, actually listening, not waiting for her to finish so he could respond. So I'm not going to sign on to anything I haven't read. Completely, she said. And I'm not going to be grateful in a way that becomes obligation. And I'm not going to forget that you have your own reasons for wanting the Harmons down, and that my usefulness to you is part of why you're sitting here. All of that is accurate, Lucian said. I know, she said. I'm saying it so we're clear. We're clear. She nodded. She picked up the card with Maya Osei's name on it. She put it in her bag. She finished her coffee. She left the deli at 1:47 and called Maya Osei from the sidewalk. Standing in the cold with traffic moving around her, and Maya picked up and had clearly been expecting the call and said, in a voice that was brisk and precise and no nonsense, that she had 2 hours free that afternoon and could Amara come to her office at 3. Amara said yes and gave herself exactly 10 seconds of standing on the sidewalk, feeling the cold and the weight of what she was walking into, and then she started walking. She did not see the black car parked on the opposite side of the street. She did not see the man inside it who was on a phone, speaking in a low voice, watching her walk away from the deli with the intent focus of someone who has been paid to observe and report. The man's name was Doyle. He had worked for 11 years for a private security firm that the Harmon Group retained for a fixed monthly fee. He had followed Amara from her apartment building that morning. He had watched her enter the deli. He had photographed the exterior when Lucian Vey went in 20 minutes later. He was reporting all of this now to a man named Carl, who was Gerald Harmon's head of private operations, who had held that title for 9 years, and who received the information with the flat professional composure of someone who deals in information for a living. She met with Vey, Carl said. Hour and a half, Doyle confirmed. She left first. He stayed. Where is she now? Walking north on Carver. She's on her phone. Carl was quiet for a moment. He was sitting in the office above the Harmon Group's main lobby, a room that Gerald never entered because Gerald preferred to believe that what Carl did was done elsewhere and required no direct knowledge. This was a useful fiction that Carl had maintained for 9 years and intended to maintain indefinitely. The footage from last night, Carl said. We have a problem. I know. We have a bigger problem than Gerald understands. Carl turned to his computer screen, where a document was open that Gerald had also never seen. A private risk assessment Carl had prepared 6 months ago and never delivered, because delivering it would have required Gerald to make changes he was constitutionally incapable of making. Vey doesn't move like this without a foundation. If he's building a case, and she's part of it. She's a financial analyst, Doyle said. She read the filings. Then she found something we already knew was there. Carl said. He was quiet for a moment. She's not going to a journalist. Going to a lawyer. That's worse. He paused. Find out which lawyer. Do it quietly. And Doyle, his voice changed slightly, modulated downward. I need you to understand that the situation last night changed things significantly. The approach that Petra authorized. I wasn't involved in that, Doyle said quickly. I know you weren't, Carl said. I'm not asking you to be involved in anything like that now. I'm asking you to gather information. Just information. He paused. For now. Doyle said nothing. For now, Carl said again. Amara walked into Maya Osi's office at 2:58 and sat down across from a woman in her mid-40s who had the kind of face that had made a peace with itself decades ago and never looked back. Maya shook her hand once firmly, poured her a glass of water without asking, and said, "Tell me everything. Don't edit. I'll tell you what matters," Amara told her. All of it. The invitation, the table placement, the accusation, the footage, the card, the meeting, the call with David Park, and what he had said about the description. Her own financial analysis of the Harmon Group's subsidiaries. Lucian Vey. She told it in order without embellishment, and watched Maya make notes in a small leather notebook with a pen that moved fast. When she was done, Maya put the pen down. "Okay," Maya said. "A few things." She flipped back a page in her notebook. "The description your supervisor relayed no significant domestic connections, if that can be documented. It substantially strengthens a targeted discrimination case. I want everything David Park told you in writing. Email or text, doesn't matter. Today if possible. He might not. I'll send him a letter tonight that makes the alternative to cooperation less attractive," Maya said. "He'll cooperate." She turned a page. "The footage from the hotel. How many copies exist and who controls them?" Lucian said it was secured. "Copies in 3 locations." Maya's pen paused for just a fraction of a second. "Do you trust that?" Amara considered the question honestly. "I trust that he has reasons to want the footage to exist," she said. "Whether that's the same as trusting him?" "It's not," Maya said. "But it'll do for now." She kept writing. "I'm going to need the original hotel footage through a formal request before the end of the week. If the hotel tries to claim it doesn't exist or has been deleted, we have a problem, but we can address that problem." She looked up. "What did Vey ask you to do?" "To put my name on a financial analysis of the Harmon Group's subsidiary structures, and to give a formal statement about what I witnessed at the gala." Maya looked at her steadily. "And you're considering it?" "I did the analysis this morning," Amara said, "before I called him. I did it because I wanted to know and because..." She stopped. "Because it was there, and I could see it, and it needed to be seen." Maya studied her. "Do you understand what the Harmon family will do if you do this?" "Lucian told me." "Lucian Vey's version of what they'll do," Maya said, "and my version of what they'll do are probably different, because his version is shaped by his understanding of how far he can protect you, and I'm going to give you the version without that assumption." She leaned forward slightly. "Gerald Harmon has an attorney named Patterson who has been destroying careers professionally and legally for 15 years. If you become a formal witness or a named analyst in any document used against the Harmon Group, Patterson will open an investigation into every professional decision you have made in the last 6 years. He will look for errors, conflicts of interest, undisclosed information. He will not necessarily find anything actionable, but he will find things that look bad in a certain light, because everyone has things that look bad in a certain light, and he is very good at the light." Amara sat with that. "And Meridian," Maya continued. "Your firm will distance themselves." "I'm sorry. I know that's hard to hear. I already knew that. Your professional references in this city will cool significantly. You may need to build outside of this city. It's not impossible. It is real, and it is the cost." Maya held her gaze. "I'm not telling you. I'm not to do it. I'm telling you so that you decide with your eyes open rather than because someone with a great deal of power made it sound manageable." Amara nodded slowly. "What would you do," she said, "if you were me?" Maya looked at her for a long moment. "I'd do it," she said. "But I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've watched a lot of people make the safer choice, and I've watched what that does to them over time. So take my answer with that in mind." She picked up her pen again. "What I think is irrelevant. What I need from you is a decision, and I need it in the next 48 hours, because the window for controlling the narrative on what happened last night is closing, and we need to be ahead of it, not responding to it." Amara looked at the water glass. She looked at her hands. The tremor from last night had been gone since the morning had burned out sometime around the 2nd hour of reading financial filings, but she could feel the echo of it, the memory of it. She thought about Jonas Ibarra, whose name she hadn't known an hour ago, who had filed a complaint and then been quietly maneuvered back to Lagos. She thought about the workers behind the labor network numbers she'd read this morning, the people who existed in the gap between declared payroll and operational cost. She thought about what it meant to see the gap and look away. She opened her mouth, and then her phone rang. She looked at it. Unknown number. Not the number from the cream card she'd saved, that one. A different unknown. You should probably answer it, Maya said. Amara answered it. Miss Kessari, a man's voice. Older. The professional warmth of someone who has rehearsed warmth. For so long it has become texture rather than substance. My name is Robert Patterson. I represent the Harmon family. I'm reaching out because I believe there may be some significant misunderstandings from last evening that we would very much like to address directly, and I think a conversation between the right people could resolve this quickly and satisfactorily for everyone involved. Amara said nothing. I understand this has been a difficult experience, Patterson continued, and the family is prepared to offer a formal acknowledgement and commensurate compensation for any distress caused to quiet. We believe that a quiet resolution would serve all parties better than prolonged public. How did you get this number? Amara said. A brief pause. Miss Kessari, if we could focus on the how did you get this number? She said again. Her voice was very flat. Silence. She ended the call. She looked at Maya. They're watching me, she said. They've been watching me since this morning. Maya's expression didn't change. She reached forward and picked up her own phone and made a call, speaking in a low, fast voice to someone who answered immediately. She said 3 things. Yes, today. The Kessari matter. Then she ended the call. I have someone I'd like you to meet, Maya said. He does digital security and counter surveillance. He's coming here now. She put her phone flat on the desk. And Amara, she used her name for the first time. I need you to hear this. The fact that Patterson called you this fast means they're afraid of you. Not of Vey. Of you. Specifically, of what you know and what you're willing to do with it. She held her gaze. That should scare you a little. It should also tell you something. Amara looked at the phone in her own hand. She thought about Patterson's voice, professionally warm, rehearsed smooth, and underneath it, she'd heard it. She was good at hearing what was underneath things' urgency. Real urgency. The urgency of someone who has been handed a problem and told to make it disappear before it gets structural. They had chosen her because they thought she was nothing, and now they were afraid of her. She put her phone in her bag. She looked at Maya Osei. I'm going to do it, she said. I want a contract between us in writing. I want to see the full scope of what you're undertaking on my behalf and what it costs. And I want you to understand that I'm not doing this because of Lucian Vey. I'm doing it because I read the filings, and what's in them is real, and the people it's hurting are real. And the only thing that's been stopping anyone from doing something about it is that nobody with the right skills has been willing to put their name on it. Maya nodded once. Also, Amara said, I'm going to need you to call Meridian Consulting's legal team tonight. Before they call me, I want to be ahead of it. Maya almost smiled. That's the right instinct. I know, Amara said. Outside Maya's office window, 4 floors below on the street, Doyle sat in his car and photographed the building entrance and sent the image to Carl's phone and waited. He had been doing this work for 11 years. He knew how these situations developed. He knew the difference between a witness and a problem. He was beginning to think that Amara Kessari was becoming the second thing. Carl received the photograph and the office address and looked up Maya Osei's name in 30 seconds and felt something shift in his chest that was not quite fear, but was the professional cousin of it. The recognition that a situation has developed a momentum that may no longer be controllable by the usual means. He picked up his phone and called Gerald Harmon. Gerald answered on the 3rd ring the way a man answers who has been sitting by his phone for 3 hours, hoping it will be good news. We have a problem, Carl said. Petra. It's not about Petra anymore, Carl said. It stopped being about Petra at some point this morning. He paused. Gerald, I need you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is the honest version of where we are, and it's not the version you're going to want to hear. Gerald said nothing. The woman from last night is not going away, Carl said. She has retained a lawyer. She met with Lucian Vey for 90 minutes this afternoon. She did her own financial analysis of our subsidiary structures this morning, and she found the payroll gap. He let that land. She found it from public records alone, Gerald. In 3 hours. Another pause. Whatever you have been told about last night being manageable, whoever told you that was wrong. This is not manageable through Patterson. This has passed that point. The silence on the other end of the line was the silence of a man who has spent 30 years building a structure and is hearing, for the first time, from someone he trusts, that the foundation is gone. "What do we do?" Gerald said. His voice had lost its architecture. It was just a voice now, older than it usually sounded. Carl looked at his computer screen. He looked at the risk assessment he had written 6 months ago and never delivered. He looked at the name at the top of it, the name of the Labor Authority investigator, who had been quietly building a parallel case for 8 months. The one whose inquiry the Harmon family's board members had been slowing down. The one who, Carl now understood, had not been slowed down enough. "I think," Carl said carefully, "that we need to have a conversation about what survival looks like. For the family. For you personally." He paused. "And I think you need to have it without Petra in the room." On the other end of the line, Gerald Harmon breathed. And in that breath was the sound of a man who has run out of the thing. He had always relied on not money, not influence, not connections, but the certainty that the people he targeted would stay targeted, that the world would stay arranged the way he had arranged it, that someone like Amara Kessari would absorb what was done to her and disappear into it. That certainty was gone. And without it, Gerald Harmon was just an old man in an expensive office, holding a phone, listening to the sound of everything he had built beginning, very quietly, to come apart. Contract between Amara and Maya OCC was signed at 4:47 in the afternoon. 7 pages, clean language, no ambiguity. Maya had a notary come to the office. The whole thing took 11 minutes. Amara read every word before she signed, which Maya had expected, and which was why she drafted it in plain English, rather than the layered legal architecture most clients never actually understood. When it was done, Maya put the signed copies in a folder and handed Amara one and said, "Now we move fast," because they're already moving. Fast meant the next 72 hours were nothing Amara had ever experienced in her professional life, and her professional life had included a merger negotiation that ran 18 hours straight, and a quarterly audit that had found a $7 million discrepancy nobody wanted to claim. Fast meant Maya on the phone with Meridian's legal team at 6 in the evening, while Amara sat in the chair across from her desk and listened to Maya dismantle every position they tried to take with the calm efficiency of someone who has had this specific conversation 40 times and knows exactly where it ends. Fast meant the digital security contact, a quiet man named Ferris, who wore the same gray jacket every time she saw him over the next 3 days and communicated primarily in short declarative sentences, sweeping her apartment and her phone and her laptop for monitoring software and finding, on her phone, something small and invisible that had been installed sometime between her leaving the gala and arriving home, which told her, concretely and without room for interpretation, that someone had been in her bag. She stood in her kitchen at 10:15 that night, while Ferris showed her the code on his tablet, and she felt something cold move through her that was not quite fear. Fear was hot. This was the other thing. The thing that comes after fear burns out and leaves clarity behind. "When?" she said. "Installed between 9 and midnight last night, based on the timestamp," Ferris said. "Hotel or street. Someone with physical access to your device." "The hotel," she said. "When security had my bag." Ferris nodded. He removed it in 40 seconds and replaced her SIM card and handed her phone back and said, "New number. I'll give it to Maya. Anyone else you need to reach out to, go through her for the next week." She nodded. She looked at the phone in her hand. She thought about Curtis, the security guard, who had been holding her bag, and she thought about Carl, whose name she didn't know yet, but whose existence she was beginning to understand through its effects, the way you understand weather through what it does to things. She slept 4 hours. Not because she couldn't sleep longer, but because her mind reached a point of saturation at 2 in the morning and simply stopped processing. And when she woke at 6, she felt, not rested exactly, but sharpened, the way metal feels after grinding. The Meridian situation resolved itself by Thursday morning in exactly the way Maya had predicted. David Park sent a carefully worded email suggesting that given the circumstances, a temporary leave of absence might be mutually beneficial, and Maya responded on Amara's behalf with 3 paragraphs that made clear the cost of framing it that way. And by Thursday afternoon, it had been renegotiated to a formal separation with a severance package and a neutral reference that would confirm dates of employment and nothing else. Amara read the final terms and signed them, and did not feel the grief about it until Thursday night when she was making dinner, and the specific silence of the apartment, the silence that meant there was nowhere to be tomorrow morning, hit her like something physical, and she stood over the stove for a full minute not cooking, just standing. Then she turned the heat up and finished cooking and ate and opened her laptop and kept working. The financial analysis was 43 pages by Friday. 43 pages with citations and cross-references, and a methodology section that Maya's contact at the Labor Authority, a woman named Investigator Chen, who had been building the Harmon case for 8 months and had the particular energy of someone who has been right about something for a long time and has not been allowed to prove it, read in one sitting, and called Maya immediately after. "Where has she been?" Chen said. It wasn't quite a question. "Working," Maya said. The document was submitted formally to the Labor Authority on Friday afternoon. It was also sent, simultaneously, to 2 journalists, the ones Lucian had mentioned, who turned out to be a veteran investigative reporter at the city paper named Graves, and a documentary journalist named Park, who was not related to David Park, and who had been trying to crack the Harmon story from a different angle for 14 months. Graves called Maya within the hour. Park called within 2. Amara did not speak to either of them directly. Not yet. That was deliberate. Maya had been clear. The document speaks first. You speak after, when the narrative is already moving, and you are choosing where to enter it, not responding to where they put you. She understood that instinctively. She had spent enough time in meetings, watching people react to things, rather than position themselves ahead of them, to know the difference. What she had not anticipated was Petra. Petra Harmon showed up at Amara's apartment building on Friday evening at 7:30. Amara knew because the new building camera system, Ferris had upgraded it Wednesday, efficient and without ceremony, sent an alert to her phone, showing Petra standing in the lobby, not buzzing, just standing, wearing no makeup, which was the most startling thing. Without the performance, she looked her age. She looked like someone who had not slept in 3 days, which was probably accurate. Amara watched the camera feed for 30 seconds. Then she buzzed her in. They stood in Amara's living room with no offer of coffee, no pretense of comfort. The 2 of them in a room that was small and honest and had nothing in it that was designed to impress anyone. "My father is going to try to destroy you," Petra said. She said it without preamble, looking at the floor first and then making herself look up. Not through Patterson. Something else. Carl Meitner, his operations head, he's been authorized to do things that they're not legal. What Patterson does is legal. What Carl does isn't. Amara stood with her arms at her sides. "Why are you telling me this?" Petra's jaw tightened. "Because what I did at the gala was wrong," she said. "I know I'm not asking you to care about that. I just need you to know that I know it." "What does Carl Meitner do?" Amara said. Petra stopped, pressed her lips together. "He makes problems disappear. That's the phrase. My father has used it my whole life. Carl makes problems disappear. When I was 12, a man tried to sue my father for a construction accident on one of his properties. He went away. I didn't know what that meant until I was older," she exhaled. "I don't know exactly what he's planning. I only know Carl was in my father's office for 2 hours yesterday, and he came out and my father looked. My father hasn't looked like that in 30 years. It's like something scared him." Amara looked at her. She was running assessment, the way she ran numbers, looking for the pattern underneath. Petra's hands were shaking slightly. Her voice had no performance left in it. She was either genuinely frightened or she was very good, and Amara had seen her perform at the gala. That practiced ease, that deployed charm, and this was not that. This was someone stripped of the equipment she usually operated with. "Does your father know you're here?" Amara said. "No." "Carl know?" "No, I think." She faltered. "I hope not." "You need to go to the investigators," Amara said. "Not to me. To Investigator Chen at the Labor Authority. Tonight, if possible. You tell them everything you know about Carl Meitner and what he's been authorized to do." Petra stared at her. "If I do that, your lawyer negotiates your position before you go in." "You have a lawyer?" "My family's lawyer." "Not your family's lawyer," Amara said. "Your lawyer. Someone who is working for you specifically, whose interest is yours and not your father's." She held Petra's gaze. can give you a name. Petra looked at her with an expression Amara couldn't quite categorize and didn't try to. Why would you? Because I'm not interested in you, Amara said. It came out clean, not cruel, just accurate. I'm interested in the workers your family has been exploiting for 7 years. Whatever helps that case move forward faster is what I'm interested in. Petra swallowed. Okay, she said. Her voice was very small. Amara gave her Maya's card. Then she called Maya, briefly, from the kitchen while Petra stood in the living room, and told her to expect a call and from whom. Maya said, understood. I'll refer her to Kim. Kim was the other attorney in Maya's building, whose practice ran parallel but separate. Clean separation, no conflict. Petra left at 7:54. Amara watched her go on the camera feed, watched her walk out into the evening and stand on the sidewalk for a moment looking at her phone, and then watched her make a call. Standing straight. Something had changed in her posture in the past 20 minutes. Not confidence. Something sturdier than confidence. The particular uprightness of someone who has made a decision they can't take back and is holding themselves accountable to it. Amara turned away from the camera feed. She had 37 minutes of quiet before her phone rang with Maya's new contact number. Chen wants to meet you, Maya said, without introduction. In person. Tomorrow morning. She's been read in on the document, and she wants the supplementary testimony before she takes the next step with the authority. What's the next step? She's ready to move from preliminary inquiry to formal investigation. She needs your statement on the record to do it without the Harmon board members being able to close it down again. Your document gave her the financial foundation. Your testimony gives her the standing. Amara sat down on the edge of her couch. What time tomorrow? 8 o'clock. Her office. I'll be there at 7:45. I know, Maya said. And for the first time in 4 days, Amara heard something in Maya's voice that was not purely professional. Brief. Real. Get some sleep, Amara. She tried. She got 5 hours, which was better than it had been. She woke at 5:30 with the specific alertness of someone whose body has decided that sleep is over and there is work to do. And she was at Maya's office at 7:15 and they were at Chen's office at 7:44. Investigator Chen was 52, compact, with the kind of face that had decided long ago to invest in being believed rather than liked. Her office was stacked with files, in a way that looked chaotic and wasn't. She shook Amara's hand with both of hers briefly and said, I've read your document 3 times. Sit down. They sat. The next 2 hours were the most rigorous professional conversation Amara had ever been part of, and she had been part of some difficult ones. Chen went through the document section by section, not accepting anything on Amara's authority, pushing every citation, every cross-reference, every methodology choice, asking, not is this right, but can you defend this if Patterson challenges it in a formal proceeding, which was a different question and a harder one. Amara defended it, every piece. There were 2 places where she said, this inference is sound, but the direct documentation is circumstantial and would need corroboration. And Chen nodded both times and said, I have the corroboration. I needed you to identify the gaps yourself, which told Amara that the 2 hours were not Chen learning from her, but Chen testing her, making sure that the analyst attached to this document was someone whose credibility could hold under direct challenge. At 9:53, Chen sat back in her chair and looked at Maya. I'm filing Monday, she said. Formal investigation, full scope, the subsidiary structures, and the labor network, both. I need her statement before then. She'll give it today, Maya said. I'll give it today, Amara confirmed. Chen nodded. She pulled a file from the stack on her right. There's something else, she said. She opened the file and slid a photograph across the desk. Amara looked at it. A man, 50s, heavyset, a face that communicated nothing about its inner life, standing outside a building she didn't recognize. Carl Meitner, Chen said. We've had him on a separate thread for 6 months. Witness tampering, primarily. Jonas Isabara's departure from the country was not voluntary in any meaningful sense, and Carl Meitner arranged it. She paused. Last night we picked up a communication between Meitner and a contact of his suggesting that a particular problem you were not named, but the description and timing make it unambiguous, needed to be addressed before Monday. The room was very quiet. Addressed, Amara said. The language was oblique, Chen said. Intentionally. These people are careful. She did not look away from Amara. We're taking it seriously. Maya's hand moved to her phone. We already contacted Vey, Chen said. Separately. He contacted us simultaneously. He has Meitner under surveillance as of this morning. She paused. I don't love that arrangement, but I love the alternative less. Amara looked at the photograph of Karl Meitner. She looked at his face, the blankness of it, the professional anonymity, and she thought about the monitoring software on her phone, installed while her bag was in the hands of a security guard who was following orders from a chain that led back to this man. She thought about Jonas Ibarra in Legacies. She thought about Makes Problems Disappear and what that had meant when Petra was 12 and what it meant now. What do I need to do? She said. Exactly what you're doing, Chen said. Give me the statement. Don't change your routine so dramatically that Meitner knows we're aware. Let us handle the operational piece. She slid the photograph back into the file. And Miss Kessari, I want you to understand something. The Harmon Group has survived 3 previous attempts to move against it, 2 regulatory inquiries, and 1 attempted whistleblower case, all of which collapsed before they became formal. They collapsed because the people building them made mistakes, or were isolated, or were managed out of their positions before the case was solid. She closed the file. Your document is the best financial foundation this investigation has had. That matters enormously. It also makes you the most significant threat the Harmon family has faced in 10 years. I want you to hold both of those things at the same time. Amara held them. She gave her statement. It took 4 hours and a break for sandwiches that Maya ordered, and Amara ate mechanically, not tasting anything, because her mind was somewhere else. In the numbers, in the gaps between declared payroll and operational cost, in the faces of workers she had never met, whose lives existed in the difference between what the Harmon Group claimed to pay and what it actually paid. She gave the statement clearly and completely, and without embellishment, and she did not make it dramatic because she didn't need to. The facts were already dramatic. The facts were already indicting. At 3 in the afternoon, she walked out of Chen's building into the cold with Maya beside her, and she felt, for the first time in 5 days, something adjacent to relief, not relief itself, the shape of where relief would be once this was over. What now, she said. Now we wait for Monday, Maya said. And tonight you don't go home alone. Amara looked at her. Not because I think something will happen, Maya said. Because I think the next 48 hours are the highest risk window, and I would rather be wrong and overcautious than right and underprepared. She paused. Ferris has a safe house. It's not dramatic. It's a 3-bedroom apartment in the Meridian district that he uses for clients. You go there tonight. You work if you need to, and you stay through the weekend. I need my laptop. Ferris will get it. Amara stopped walking. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at Maya and thought about what her life had been 6 days ago. The morning commute, the quiet office, the work she was good at in a building where nobody knew her well enough to either help or hurt her. She thought about how she had believed, in some compartment of herself she hadn't examined closely, that invisibility was a form of safety. It wasn't. It had never been. It had just been the absence of the right kind of notice. Okay, she said. The safe house was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like good coffee from the place on the ground floor. And the apartment was plain and clean with a desk near the window, and a good lamp and a refrigerator that Ferris had stocked with the kinds of foods that didn't require thought fruit, bread, cheese, things you could eat while working. She set her laptop up and she worked through the evening, and she did not look at social media, which was Maya's instruction, and a good one, because the story had broken in partial form. Through Graves's paper that afternoon, a careful piece, accurate, naming the Harmon Group's labor inquiry, and the gala incident, and the financial document, without naming Amara directly yet, because that was a negotiated choice. Her name was her timing, and she would choose when, and the response was significant enough that looking at it would have taken up hours she needed to spend on something else. At 9 o'clock, Lucian called. Not the number from the card. A new number, one that Ferris's system had flagged as clean. She answered it. Chen told me you gave the statement, he said. Yes. And Meitner, his voice was very flat on the name. You know about Meitner, Chen told me. A pause. He's being watched continuously. He won't move without us seeing it first. And if he does move, she said. What happens? He doesn't, Lucian said. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have, he said. He doesn't move. I've made that very clear to the people he reports to, and the people he reports to have calculated the cost of ignoring that clarity. She sat with that. She thought about asking what the cost was. She decided she didn't need to know. Some things you hold at arm's length, not because you're afraid of them, but because knowing the full shape of them doesn't help you and might complicate decisions you need to make cleanly. Monday, she said. Monday. Is Gerald going to fight it? She said. The formal investigation. When Chen files Monday morning, what does Gerald do? A brief silence. Gerald might want to, Lucian said. Carl Meitner is going to advise him not to. And Carl Meitner is the only person Gerald Harmon has listened to consistently for 9 years. Another pause. Carl's calculation changed this morning. He understands his own exposure now. He'll advise Gerald to cooperate. How do you know what Carl's calculation is? Because I told him, Lucian said simply. This morning. In person. She pressed her back against the chair. You met with Carl Meitner. Briefly. And he listened. People generally do, Lucian said, when the alternative is made sufficiently concrete. She exhaled. I need you to tell me something, she said. If I can. When this is over, when the investigation is filed, and the Harmons are in front of the authority, and my name is clear, what do you want from this? From me. She kept her voice even. I told you at the deli I wasn't going to be grateful in a way that became obligation. I meant it. But I also know that you didn't do all of this out of pure civic feeling, and I'd rather have an honest conversation about it now than an uncomfortable one later. The silence on the other end was longer than his other silences. Long enough that she wondered if she'd miscalculated. Then he said, I told you at the deli there was an opportunity, he said, after, for you to build something. I meant that as exactly what it sounded like. A business opportunity, real funded yours, not a favor. An investment in something I think would be profitable, and that you would run correctly, because you are demonstrably the right person to run it. He paused. The international emerging market analysis that you do, the kind you did on the Harmon subsidiaries this week, there's a gap in the legitimate market for it. The kind of deep structural analysis that finds what public filings obscure, legally, for clients who need to know what they're actually buying before they buy it. Another pause. I have clients like that. I have contacts who have been looking for something exactly like what you would build. And the honest version of my interest is that it would be profitable for me to be an early investor in something that would become quite large. She looked at the window, the city outside, lit and indifferent. And what do you get besides the financials return, she said. An analyst, he said, occasionally, for specific things, with full disclosure each time of what I'm asking and why, and full right of refusal on your end. No obligation, no accumulated debt. A professional relationship with defined terms. Written terms, she said. Whatever terms you want, he said. Just quiet for a moment. Then, I'll think about it. I know, he said. She almost said something else. She didn't. She ended the call and sat in the safe house apartment with the good lamp and the city outside and the 43-page document she had built in a week from grief and anger and the specific refusal to be what the Harmons had decided she was. Sunday passed in work and silence. Maya called twice, brief updates. Ferris appeared once to swap out a router, he said, was showing latency issues, and disappeared again without ceremony. Amara ate bread and cheese and fruit, and drank too much coffee, and slept 6 hours Sunday night, which was the most she'd slept since the gala, and woke Monday morning with her body running at a frequency. She didn't have a name for somewhere between terror and complete clarity, the two things occupying the same space, simultaneously. She dressed carefully. Black. Clean lines. The kind of thing that said, I am not performing for this room. I am working. She was in Maya's car at 7:15. Maya was already on the phone. Through the window, Amara watched the city pass, the morning commute, the coffee shops opening, the particular ordinary momentum of a day that had no idea what was about to happen inside it. Chen filed at 7 o'clock, Maya said, lowering her phone. Formal investigation, full scope, it's done. Amara nodded. The hearing is at 10, Maya said. Emergency session. The authority moved fast because of the risk of asset movement. Gerald Harmon has been notified. She paused. Patterson called me at 6:45. What did he want? To know if there was still room for a settlement. There isn't, Amara said. I know, Maya said. I told him. Car moved through the city. Amara looked out the window. She thought about the morning she had driven to the Harmon Grand Hotel in a taxi 7 days ago, an entire previous life ago in a burgundy dress, with her notes prepared and her talking points ready and her belief, still intact then, that if you did the work and showed up prepared and conducted yourself with dignity, rooms would receive you accordingly. She had been wrong about that. Rooms receive you according to what they've already decided you are. But rooms can be wrong. The Labor Authority building was gray stone on a wide stance, municipal, in a way that was meant to communicate permanence and reliability, and did. Maya's car stopped in front of it at 8:40. They got out. Amara looked at the entrance, the wide steps, the revolving doors, the people moving in and out on a Monday morning, and she felt the full weight of the past weeks settle into her body all at once. Every sleepless hour, and every signed document, and every defended citation, and every moment of terror pressed quiet so she could keep working. She felt all of it at once, and then she exhaled, and it moved through her, and was behind her. She walked up the steps. Inside, the hearing room was already populated. Chen stood near the front with 2 associates, reviewing documents with the focused efficiency of someone who has been building to this moment for 8 months. Several members of the authority board were present, including, Amara noticed, 2 who had been slowing the inquiry for the past several months, and who were now sitting with the specific stillness of deepseas, people who understand that their position in a situation has changed and are still computing what that means. Graves from the city paper was in the public gallery. Park, the documentary journalist, was beside him. 3 other press credentials she didn't recognize. And at the respondents' table, Patterson, impeccable in a dark suit, with 2 associates. No Gerald. Gerald was not here. Gerald Harmon, who had stood in his ballroom 6 days ago with absolute certainty of his own untouchability, was not in this room. His lawyer was here in his place, which told Amara everything she needed to know about Gerald's current understanding of where things stood. Carl Meitner was also not present. She looked for him and he was not there, and she felt the absence of him, the way you feel the absence of a sound that has been present. For so long you forgot you were hearing it. She sat down beside Maya at the table on the left side of the room. Chen caught her eye across the space and gave her one brief nod. Amara put her hands flat on the table in front of her. She looked at them steady, both of them, no tremor, and she thought about the woman who had stood at table 14 with her hands shaking in her lap where nobody could see them. And she thought, same hands, same woman, and the distance between that moment and this one was not luck or rescue. It was 72 hours of work so focused it had left everything else behind. The hearing chair called the session to order at 10 o'clock precisely. Patterson rose immediately. The Harmon Group wishes to register. Sit down, Mr. Patterson, the chair said. You'll have your opportunity. She adjusted her glasses and opened the file in front of her. We're here on the matter of the Labor Authority's formal investigation into Harmon Group Holdings and its subsidiary entities, filed this morning pursuant to Section 14 of the Labor Standards Act. She looked up at the room. The authority has reviewed the preliminary documentation submitted by Investigator Chen's office, as well as a supplementary financial analysis submitted by, she glanced at the file, Amara Kessari, CFA. She paused. Miss Kessari, are you present? Yes, Amara said. 200 people had turned to look at her 6 days ago in a ballroom. The weight of that had felt like something collapsing on her. This room was 30 people, and the weight of it felt different, not the weight of judgment, but of attention. The kind of attention that comes from people who understand that what they are watching matters. The authority recognizes your contribution to this proceeding, the chair said. You'll be asked to speak to the methodology of your analysis during the evidentiary portion. Do you have counsel present? I do, Maya said beside her. Patterson was on his feet again. He had the look of a man who has been handed a situation that has moved beyond his tools, but who is constitutionally incapable of not deploying those tools anyway. If I may, the Harmon Group wishes to state for the record that the document submitted by Ms. Kessari was compiled under circumstances that raise significant questions about the impartiality. Mr. Patterson, the chair said, and her voice had a quality that Amara recognized. Not loud, not aggressive, but immovable. The same quality, she thought, as a certain man's voice in a certain ballroom. the voice of someone who does not need volume to communicate that they are not moving. The evidentiary challenges will be addressed in the evidentiary portion of this proceeding. This is the opening session. I won't ask you again. Patterson sat, and in the silence that followed, in the specific quiet of a room that has found its gravity and settled around it, Amara Kessari, who had been chosen as a target because someone calculated she had nothing, looked at the document in front of her. 43 pages. Every number defended. Every gap identified and sourced. Every inference labeled as inference, and every fact labeled as fact. She had built it in 72 hours, from grief and anger, and the refusal to disappear. The chair leaned forward. "Let's begin," she said. And Patterson, across the room, opened his mouth to object one more time, his last automatic reflex, the muscle memory of a man who has won by talking for 30 years, and looked at Amara's face and stopped. Because what he saw there was not the frightened woman from a ballroom who had been surrounded and accused and had nobody in her corner. What he saw was someone who had done the math, built the case, and was sitting in a room where the math and the case were now the only things that mattered. Patterson did not speak again for 11 minutes. That was how long the opening portion of the session ran before Chen stood and began presenting the foundational evidence. And in those 11 minutes, Amara watched Patterson's associates pass notes between themselves with the specific urgency of people revising a strategy in real time. She watched Patterson read each note and then look at the table in front of him and then at the chair, and she could see across the room the moment he understood that the thing he had been hired to prevent had already happened, that the filing that morning was not a threat or a negotiating position. It was a wall already built, and his job had shifted without his client informing him from preventing the wall to figuring out what to do now that it existed. Chen spoke for 40 minutes without notes. She had the evidence organized in the way that evidence is organized when someone has been building a case for 8 months with the patience of a person who knows that a case built too fast falls apart, and a case built correctly stands up to everything. She walked through the labor network structure, the contracting firm that existed as a layer of distance, the payment records, the documentation leverage. She walked through Jonas Ibarra's complaint and his subsequent departure, speaking about it in precise language that was nonetheless devastating. The complainant returned to his country of origin, following a series of interactions with individuals connected to the Harmon Group's operations division, the nature of which the authority is prepared to address separately, under witness tampering statutes. Patterson objected twice. Both times the chair sustained the objection on narrow technical grounds, and both times the information remained in the room anyway, already heard, already lodged in the understanding of everyone present, because that is how testimony works. The words exist even after the ruling. When Chen finished, she said, "The authority is also in receipt of a supplementary financial analysis prepared by Ms. Amara Kessari, which addresses the structural inconsistencies in the Harmon Group's declared payroll across 14 subsidiary entities over a 7-year period. I would ask Ms. Kessari to speak to the methodology." Amara said she had not prepared remarks. She had the document, and she had her understanding of it, which was complete, and she had the 43 pages she could have recited from memory if asked, because she had written every word of them, and she knew what every number meant because she had found every number herself and checked it twice before she wrote it down. She spoke for 35 minutes. She was not performing. That was the thing she was aware of throughout, that she was not performing competence or composure. She simply had both, not because the situation wasn't frightening, but because the work was more real to her than the fear. And when the work is more real than the fear, you can stand in a room and speak clearly regardless of who is watching. She walked through the methodology. She addressed the evidentiary standard. She identified herself, the two places where the inference outran the direct documentation, and told the room why the inference was nonetheless sound and what corroborating evidence would be needed to establish it formally. And she saw Chen make a note both times, because those were the two places Chen had the corroboration and was waiting to deploy it. Patterson challenged her on the second inference. He asked it in the careful way of a skilled attorney, not aggressive, because aggressive would look bad, but precise, designed to create a thread of doubt that he could pull. She answered him. He pushed. She answered again. He came at it from a different angle, the way lawyers do when they're testing whether you actually know the material or whether you've memorized a presentation. And she answered from the different angle with the same information in a different configuration. Because she knew the material, she didn't have a presentation. And when you actually know the material, it doesn't matter what angle someone approaches from. Patterson's sat down. One of the authority board members, a woman on the far left, whose name Amara had not been told, leaned forward and asked a question about the subsidiary structure in the third year of the 7-year period. A specific question that told Amara the woman had read the document carefully before today and had found the same seam Amara had almost missed in her first pass. Amara answered it. The woman nodded once and wrote something down. At 12:40, the chair called a recess. In the hallway, Maya squeezed Amara's arm once, briefly, the most physical warmth she had expressed in 5 days. "You did well," she said. "I know," Amara said. She said it without arrogance, just as a statement of fact, the way she would have stated any other accurate thing. They ate sandwiches in a small conference room the authority had made available. Amara ate half of hers and drank water, and sat very still and let herself be, still not planning or reviewing, just sitting in the quiet and letting the morning settle into her body. The afternoon session began at 2 o'clock. It was in the afternoon session that Gerald Harmon arrived. He came in during the first break, accompanied by an attorney she didn't recognize and a man from his board whose name she'd read in the filings. He sat at the respondent's table beside Patterson, and he did not look at Amara. For 40 minutes he did not look at her. He sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him and listened to the proceedings with the expression of a man attending his own funeral who has decided the dignified thing is to remain seated. He had aged. She could see it from across the room. Not dramatically, it had only been a week, but in the way that a week can age a person when it takes something structural from them. The absolute certainty was gone from his face. The quality she had seen in the ballroom, that ownership of whatever room he entered, was absent, and without it he looked like what he was. A 61-year-old man who had made choices over decades that had added up to this afternoon. 2:47, the chair asked whether the Harmon Group wished to make a statement for the record. Patterson spoke for 4 minutes. He said that the Harmon Group took the concerns of the authority seriously and was committed to full cooperation with the investigation. He said the family was prepared to engage in a structured remediation process. He said, and this was the sentence Amara had been waiting for, the one she had known since Monday morning was coming, because it was the only sentence left available to a man in Patterson's position, that the family wished to acknowledge that certain practices within the subsidiary network had fallen below the standard of care expected, and that steps were being taken to address this. Fallen below the standard of care expected. 7 years. 14 subsidiaries. Workers paid below minimum wage, denied benefits, kept compliant through fear of what documentation vulnerability meant for their families. Fallen below the standard of care expected. Amara looked at her hands on the table, kept them still. The chair responded that acknowledgement was noted and that the investigation would proceed regardless, and that the authority expected full documentary cooperation within 10 business days. Patterson said, of course. And then Gerald Harmon, for the first time since he entered the room, looked at Amara. It was a brief look, 5 seconds at most. And it was not the look from the ballroom, not the contempt, not the dismissal, not the performance of disgust for an audience. It was something that had no performance left in it at all. It was a man looking at the person who had, with 43 pages and 35 minutes of testimony, done what 8 months of regulatory process had not been able to do. It was a man looking at something he had catastrophically underestimated. She looked back at him. She did not look away. She did not soften her expression or harden it. She simply met his eyes with the full weight of everything that had happened in the past week and held them until he looked away first. He looked away first. The session ended at 4:15. The chair stated that the formal investigation was now open and that all parties would be notified of subsequent hearing dates. She thanked investigator Chen and her team. She thanked specifically the supplementary analyst for the thoroughness and clarity of the submitted document. She did not editorialize. She didn't need to. In the hallway afterward, Graves from the city paper appeared at Amara's elbow with a recorder already in his hand and said, "Miss, Kessari, I'd like to ask you a few questions if you have. Friday, Maya said, stepping in front of the recorder with the smooth certainty of someone who has done this before. She'll speak on Friday. I'll send you a time. Graves accepted this with the professional patience of a man who has learned that half his job is waiting. Amara walked out of the building into the cold late afternoon. Maya was beside her. The street was ordinary around them. People walking, a bus passing, the unremarkable continuation of a city that did not know or care what had just happened since inside that gray stone building. Because cities are indifferent to the specific weights people carry in and out of their rooms. She stood on the sidewalk and breathed. The cold air tasted different from the cold air of a week ago. Same city, same temperature, approximately. She could not have explained what was different about it, but it was. Go home, Maya said. Your actual home. Ferris has cleared it. It's fine. She paused. Sleep. Eat something that didn't come out of a paper bag. You have 4 days before Friday, and I need you rested for the press statement. Okay, Amara said. Amara. Maya said her name with the particular weight of someone who is about to say something they don't say professionally, but mean personally. You should know what happened in there today. I've been doing this for 20 years, and people don't do what you did. Prepare what you prepared in the time you had it, and then stand in that room and defend it the way you defended it. She looked at her steadily. Most people would have taken the settlement, or not made the call on Friday, or not read the filings in the first place. She paused. I want you to know that I know what it cost. Amara looked at her. Thank you, she said. She said it, simply without elaboration, because the moment didn't need elaboration. She took a cab home. She sat in the back seat and watched the city pass. And she thought about nothing for 12 minutes, which was the duration of the ride, which was the first 12 consecutive minutes in 7 days, when she had not been building something or defending something or holding something together through sheer force of continuity. Her apartment was her apartment, same as she had left it. Ferris had been there since she could tell, because the router had been replaced, and there was a new deadbolt on the door that she had been given keys to, but had not yet tested, but it was otherwise the same. Her books. Her mother's photograph on the shelf, the one from the market in Lagos when her mothers were 32, laughing at something outside the frame. Her kitchen with the coffee she'd left half-ground the morning after the gala. She finished grinding the coffee and made a full pot and sat at the kitchen table with it, and she let herself cry, finally, which she had not done since before the gala, had not permitted herself, because there had been no space for it that didn't feel like a fracture she couldn't afford. She cried for 20 minutes, not dramatically, no sounds, mostly just water moving through her face, while she sat at the table with both hands around the coffee mug and let the week's accumulated weight of everything she'd been holding move through her and out. When she was done, she felt scoured, not empty, scoured. The particular cleanness of having processed something completely. She drank the coffee. She made eggs. She sat at the kitchen table with her mother's photograph visible from where she sat, and she ate the eggs. And she was, for the first time in a week, simply present in her own kitchen, in her own apartment in the city, where she had decided years ago to build her life. Jonas Ibarra called 3 days later. Maya had given him her new number. He called from Lagos at 7 in the morning, which was early afternoon his time, and his voice was careful at first, the way voices are careful when they don't know yet what reception they'll receive. Miss Kessari, he said, I was told they said you put it in the document. Complaint. What happened to me? He paused. I wanted to say thank you. Put it in because it belongs in, she said. It's your story. I just wrote down what happened. A silence. Then he said, Are they going to will anything happen? Actually happen? She thought about the hearing, about Patterson's 4-minute statement, about the chair's expression when she said full documentary cooperation within 10 business days, about the board member who had read the document carefully enough to find the seam in year 3. Yes, she said. It's going to take time. The legal process takes time. But yes, he was quiet for a moment. I have a family here, he said. My wife, our children. We're fine. But I had work there. I was good at my work. Another pause. I just wanted someone to know that I was good at it. I know, she said. It's in the document. After she hung up, she sat very still. She thought about what it meant to be good at your work and have someone take that from you because you were a convenient target. She thought about how the distance between Jonas Ibarra and herself was not as large as the Harmon family had calculated. She had more resources, more credentials, more of the specific currency that the city recognized as worth engaging with. But the mechanism was the same. The selection criteria were the same. Find someone who can be discarded. Someone with no net. She opened her laptop. She started writing the proposal for the business. She had been thinking about it since Lucian had laid it out at the deli on Wednesday, and she had been thinking about it in the way she thought about the Harmon document in the hours before she started writing it, not planning yet, just letting the shape of it form in her mind, letting it become dimensional before she tried to put it into structure. Now she put it into structure. 8 pages by midnight, methodology and market analysis and projected scope and the specific gap in the legitimate market that she had identified herself, independently, before Lucian had named it, which meant it was real and not simply his framing of something he wanted. She read it back at midnight, and it was good. She made herself go to bed. Press statement on Friday was Maya's choreography and Amara's words, and the combination worked in the way that good collaboration always works when both people are doing the thing they are actually built for. Maya had prepared the room, not a press conference. A seated briefing, 12 journalists, specific publications, managed access, and Amara sat at the table, at the front of it, with her notes at the front of her that she did not use, and spoke for 20 minutes about what she had witnessed at the gala, what she had found in the financial filings, and what she believed it meant. She spoke about Jonas Ibarra by name. She had gotten his permission. She spoke about the 14 subsidiaries in the 7 years, and the specific arithmetic of exploitation, what it meant in actual dollars per worker per week, what the cumulative number looked like across the workforce across the years. Because she believed, and had always believed, that abstraction was how systems like this survived, and that numbers made specific and human-sized were the thing that systems like this couldn't absorb. She did not speak about Lucian Vey. She had decided this before Friday, and she did not change it in the room. He had not asked her not to. She simply understood, with the clarity she'd been developing all week, that his presence in the story was a door that opened onto rooms she couldn't control, and that the story, as it needed to be told, was complete without him. Graves asked about him anyway. There are reports that Lucian Vey was present at the gala and intervened in the initial incident. Can you speak to his role in the subsequent investigation? I can speak to my own role, Amara said. The document and the testimony are mine. The financial analysis was built by me from public records. Those facts stand independently of who else was in what room. Graves made a note. He did not push. He was, as Lucian had said, someone who knew how to use information correctly, which meant he also knew when a door was closed and how to work around it. The story ran that evening in Graves's paper. Long, careful, sourced. Devastating in the specific way that accurate journalism is devastating, not through drama, but through accumulation, through the weight of specific facts placed next to each other until the picture they make is undeniable. Park's documentary piece ran a companion piece online with the same restraint and the same effect. By the following Monday, 2 of the Harmon Group's primary business partners had issued statements about reevaluating their relationships with the family's companies. By Wednesday, the shell contracting firm that had served as the labor network's legal buffer had filed for dissolution. By the following Friday, 3 of the subsidiary entities had been placed under the authority's administrative oversight pending the investigation. Gerald Harmon did not make a public statement. Patterson made statements on his behalf. They were careful statements, the statements of a man using language as a wall. Petra Harmon gave a formal statement to investigator Chen's office on the Tuesday after the press briefing. Amara knew this because Maya told her, and because the statement, its existence, not its contents, was referenced in a brief note from Chen that arrived in Maya's email. The witness's cooperation has been cooperative and substantive and has added significant dimension to the tampering portion of the investigation. Amara read the note twice. She did not feel satisfaction exactly. She felt the specific weight of something being balanced that had been unbalanced, which is different from satisfaction and more durable. Carl Meitner was arrested on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the hearing. Witness tampering, obstruction of a regulatory investigation, and 2 counts relating to Jonas Ibarra's departure from the country. The arrest was reported in 4 sentences in the evening paper. He had no statement. His attorney said he would contest the charges. He probably would. The legal process takes time, as Amara had told Jonas. But it was moving. She met with Lucian once more. Not at the deli at his office, which was on the 17th floor of a building in the financial district, and looked exactly as she would have expected it to look. Nothing on the walls that didn't need to be there. Clean surfaces. A view of the city that was the best argument available for owning the floor you occupied. He was already there when she arrived, standing at the window, and turned when she came in. They sat at the table. She put her proposal on the table between them. Pages plus appendices. Clean language. No ambiguity. "I've read it," he said. "I know. Maya sent it last week. It's good." "I know," she said. He almost smiled. "Not quite." "You're certain about the terms?" "I'm certain about the terms." She had spent 4 days on the terms. They were written with Maya's input and her own understanding of what she was and wasn't willing to accept, and they were clear. Company, her decisions, her clients. Lucian as an early investor, with defined returns and no operational authority. The occasional professional consultation on specific matters, each one disclosed and consented to individually, with full right of refusal and no penalty for refusal. A sunset clause at 5 years for the investment arrangement, at which point she could buy him out at fair market value. The terms are the terms. He looked at her across the table. "You know that most people who build something in the city don't build it this cleanly," he said. "Most people accumulate obligations they don't fully account for." "I know," she said. "I'm not most people." He picked up the proposal. He turned to the last page. He signed it. She signed it. Maya had already notarized her copy. Lucian's associate Reno, she had learned his name by now, produced a notary stamp that Amara chose not to think too hard about. Put her copy in her bag. She stood. He stood. "One question," she said. He waited. "The morning after the gala," she said. "Before I called you, you already knew I was going to call." "Yes." "How?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, because you went home and you read the filings," he said. "Ferris told me. He'd put a camera at the building that night for your safety, and the light in your apartment was on until 4 in the morning. He paused. Someone who went home and read the filings wasn't going to take the settlement. She looked at him. She thought about the light on in her kitchen at 4 in the morning, her and the laptop and the filings and the pattern that had been there in the public record all along, waiting for someone to read it correctly. "Thank you," she said, "for what you did at the gala. I haven't said it directly. You didn't need to." "I know," she said. "I wanted to." She picked up her bag. She walked to the door. "Amara." He said her name. "First time." She stopped but didn't turn. "You built something good this week. Not just the case. The way you built it." A pause, and she heard in his voice something she hadn't heard there before, not warmth exactly, but its structural cousin, the quality of someone speaking something they mean precisely and without frame. "Don't let this city make you think it was an accident." She turned enough to see him, just enough. He was standing where she had left him, by the table, with the signed proposal in front of him. "I know it wasn't," she said. She went down 17 floors and out into the city. Kessari's Analytic Partners opened its doors, technically its email address and a serviced office space, on the 3rd floor of a building on Alcott Street 4 months after the gala. The name was hers, the work was hers, the methodology was hers. She had 3 clients in the first month, 2 of them from Lucian's referral network, and one she had found herself through a contact she'd kept from Meridian, a contact who had called her after reading Graves's story and said, simply, "I heard you can find what isn't supposed to be found. I have a due diligence situation." She had found it. The situation had resolved in her client's favor. The client had referred 2 others. By the end of the first quarter, she had 6 clients and had hired 1 part-time analyst, a woman named Dara who was 28, and had the same quality Amara had recognized in herself at that age, the ability to look at numbers and hear what they were hiding. She paid Dara correctly. She declared everything. She kept the methodology transparent and the work defensible and the books exactly as they appeared. She was not naive about the world she operated in. She knew that Lucian Vey's referrals came with the implication of his name, which opened certain doors that would otherwise have stayed closed, and she was clear-eyed about what that meant and kept it in view at all times, the way you keep a sharp thing in view rather than forgetting it is there. The work was real. The analysis was real. The clients who came for the name stayed for the work, and the clients who came for the work told others, and the others were beginning to populate a list that was growing in the right direction. Jonas Ibarra returned to the city 14 months after the gala. The labor authorities' investigation had reached the stage where his formal presence was requested, and the request came with documentation that ensured his return was uncomplicated in the ways his departure had not been. He came to Amara's office on a Thursday afternoon, referred by Chen's office to review the sections of the financial document that pertained to his personal situation. He sat across from her desk and read each page slowly, running his finger along the numbers the way someone reads something they want to make sure is real. When he was done, he looked up. "This is all true," he said. It was not a question. "All of it," she said. He nodded. He put the document down on the desk with both hands. "Precisely, the way you put something down when you understand its weight. My wife asked me to tell you something," he said. He looked slightly embarrassed, which made him seem younger, which made him seem like what he was, a man who had done his job and been targeted for it, and had survived and carried that survival with him across an ocean and back. "She said to tell you that she puts your name in her prayers every day." Amara looked at him. She thought about what to say to this. She thought about her mother, who had also prayed, who had prayed with the specific faith of someone who needed to believe the world had more fairness in it than it showed, and she thought about what she would say to her mother now, if she could, about the week that had changed everything, and the woman she was becoming on the other side of it. "Tell her thank you," she said, "and tell her you came back." He almost smiled. Then he did smile. It changed his face entirely, made it open, made it young, made it the face of someone who has decided to let themselves believe something good. He left at 4:30. She watched him go from her office window, watched him walk out onto Alcott Street, and stand for a moment in the afternoon light, getting his bearings in a city he hadn't been in for over a year, and then turn and walk and become part of the ordinary movement of the street. She turned back to her desk. She had work to do. She always had work to do, which was no longer a complaint or a survival mechanism, but simply the texture of a life she had chosen deliberately and was building correctly. She opened her laptop. She opened the current file, a mining company's subsidiary structure in 3 jurisdictions, with the particular quality of attention that meant she had already found something and was working toward understanding exactly what it meant. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lucian. Brief, as his communications always were, the Harmon Group's board voted this morning to liquidate 3 subsidiaries. Chen will be in touch. She put the phone down. She looked at the text for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and made a note in the margin of the document she was reading, a number that needed checking, a gap she had spotted that would either mean nothing or mean everything, and she would find out which, by doing the work, the same way she always found out, the same way she had always known how to find out. The formal sanction against the Harmon Group came down 11 months after the gala. It was not a complete destruction, these things never are. The legal process being what it is, the money of the Harmon family being what it was, Patterson and his associates being as skilled as they were, but it was substantial. Fines. Mandatory remediation. Back wages for the workers in the labor network, calculated from the financial analysis Amara had submitted, which gave the number a precision that the authority could defend in any subsequent challenge. 2 of the subsidiary entities were dissolved. Gerald Harmon resigned from his position on the board of his own company in lieu of criminal referral, a negotiated exit that Carl Meitner's cooperation had made possible, and that left Gerald with enough money to live on, and nothing else that had formally defined him. Petra Harmon was fined separately and placed on a 2-year supervised period related to the bracelets incident and the gala interference. Her lawyer Kim, from Maya's building, who had done exactly what Amara had suggested and negotiated Petra's position before she spoke, had done well for her. She would not have a record. She would have 2 years of consequences and the specific education that consequences provide to people who have never had them. Amara read the ruling summary on a Monday morning in her office, with Coffee and Dara at the adjacent desk working on something else. She read it twice. She put it down. "Good news," Dara said without looking up from her screen. "Yes," Amara said. "Good," Dara said. Amara looked at the ruling for a moment longer. She thought about Gerald Harmon pointing at her across a ballroom and asking who had invited this. She thought about what he had meant by this, and what she had felt in the moment, and what she felt now, a year later, sitting in her own office, in her own company, with 11 clients and a second analyst she was about to hire, and 43 pages that had become the foundation of something he had not been able to imagine. She decided exactly what the situation warranted. Not more, not less. She picked up her coffee. She opened the next file. The gala that year, the annual Meridian Foundation Gala. Same venue, same hotel, same ballroom with the same chandeliers, and the same careful hush of curated wealth sent her an invitation in October. She stared at it for a long time. Then she called the foundation's events director and said she would not be attending, but would be happy to speak at the spring symposium, which was a different event with a different focus, and which she had been asked about before and had not had time for. The events director said they would be honored. She went to the spring symposium. She spoke for 40 minutes about structural financial opacity in mid-market private enterprises and the methodological approaches that made it legible. And she answered questions for 20 minutes after. And the room was full of the same kind of people who had been in the ballroom a year and a half ago. And some of them were the same people. And she walked through that room without looking for permission or approval or the validation of people who had not given it when it mattered. She saw Eleanor Harmon once. It was not at any official event. It was at a pharmacy on a Thursday morning, both of them reaching for the same shelf. Eleanor looked up. Their eyes met. Eleanor Harmon looked the way that a year of consequences looks on a person who had the resources to absorb consequences, but not the immunity. She was still immaculate. She was still wearing the expensive coat and the careful makeup. But the specific ease of a woman whose world was exactly as she had arranged, it was gone, and what replaced it was something that looked, if Amara had to name it, like tiredness. She said nothing to Amara. Amara said nothing to her. Eleanor looked away first, selected a different item from the shelf, and moved toward the checkout. Amara took what she had come for and went to the other register. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt the specific clarity that comes from two people understanding each other completely without speaking, which is its own kind of communication, and sometimes the most honest kind. She built the company. Slowly, the way things that are built correctly are built not all at once, not through a single dramatic moment, but through the accumulation of good decisions and real work, and the particular discipline of someone who has learned at cost the difference between what looks solid and what actually is. In the spring of the second year, she bought out the first quarter of Lucian's investment stake, early. She could not have afforded to do it without the growth of the previous 18 months, and she could afford to do it because the growth was real, and the books were what they appeared to be. She told him by email. He responded with one line, "You're ahead of schedule." She wrote back, "I know." She did not hear from him for 6 weeks after that, which was not unusual. Their professional contact had always been intermittent, specific, purposeful. He called when there was a reason, and did not call when there wasn't, which she had appreciated from the beginning and appreciated more as time went on. When he called 6 weeks later, it was to refer a client, a straightforward request, a technology company in the middle of a contested acquisition who needed someone to build the financial architecture of the case for or against the target company's stated valuation. She took the case. She did the work. The work was excellent. The client said so. And in the spring of the second year, on a morning, in April, when the city was doing the thing it does in April, when the light changes quality and becomes something you want to stand in rather than pass through, she walked into the Harmon Grand Hotel. Not for the gala, for a conference. An international financial analysis conference for which Kessari Analytic Partners was a listed sponsor, small, appropriate to the company's size, real, and at which Amara had been asked to present on a panel about cross-border corporate opacity. She walked through the lobby. She walked past the registration desk, where a young woman with a different face than the woman from two years ago took her front badge and handed it over with a smile. She walked toward the ballroom, which had been converted to a conference space, and she passed the spot where table 14 had been, and she looked at it, and she let herself look at it fully, for the first and last time, without looking away. She was wearing black again. Good fabric. Something she had bought with money she had earned doing work she had built. She went to the panel. She sat at the table at the front of the room. The moderator introduced her as the founder of Kessari Analytic Partners and mentioned, briefly and accurately, that the firm had provided the financial analysis underlying the Harmon Group investigation, and that the methodology developed in that work had since been adopted as a reference standard by 2 regional regulatory bodies. The room applauded. She looked at the room, not searching for anything, just looking with the clear and undeflected gaze of someone who no longer needed to brace herself against what she might find there. She saw Lucian in the back. She had not expected him. He was standing at the edge of the room the way he stood in rooms apart, contained, watching. He had no expression she could read from the distance, which was typical. But when her eyes found him, he lifted his coffee cup very slightly, in the specific gesture of someone acknowledging a thing without making theater of it. She turned back to the room. The moderator said, "Miss Kessari, perhaps you could start by explaining what first drew your attention to structural opacity as a problem worth solving." She thought about a woman sitting at table 14 with a menu she wasn't reading and hands that were shaking where nobody could see them. And she thought about what that woman had done with the week that followed. And she thought about 43 pages built from grief and anger and the refusal to be nothing. She thought about all of it, and then she set it down because it was hers and she carried it. And she would always carry it. But it did not need to be performed for this room or any other room. "I encountered a problem that hadn't been solved correctly," she said, "and I had the skills to solve it." That's usually how it starts. The moderator nodded and said something else, and the panel continued, and Amara Kessari spoke about her work, which was real, in a room that was listening, which was what she had earned. She no longer needed anyone's permission to belong. She never had.